The story begins with a battle where 5 warriors seem to be fighting against a single person. This person is wearing armor with red details and holding a huge sword, appearing to be wounded. About to deliver a fatal blow, a young man says that the fight ends here. His allies follow him and also prepare to attack. The large sword of the warrior with the blue cape shines under the sunlight. Without hesitation, he strikes his weapon hard on the ground, causing an explosion that shatters the ground. We see the young man who is the target standing still while several attacks fly toward him. Quickly, he jumps into the air, while dodging all the attacks with his large sword, ensuring that none of them hit him, not even slightly. A little further away, a girl with long hair activates her power to keep the blue-caped warrior strong. We discover that she blessed the warrior, whom now seems more determined than ever. He decides to strike again, causing another huge explosion that throws the gray-armored young man against the wall, leaving him cornered while a sea of light comes toward him. Surprising everyone, he just watches with bored expression. Thinking to himself, the young man concludes that he won't be able to block that blow. A loud crash occurs, sending debris flying everywhere. Flying through the air with his cape on fire, the protagonist wonders if it's over. Looking at the blue sky, he says that perhaps this is a fitting end for a demon lord. His body lands on the ground, and waking from his blackout, the young man wonders why he is hearing so much noise. Suddenly, a voice tells someone else to hurry up and finish the job, since that is the demon lord and they don't know when he might regain his powers. A bit dizzy, our boy sits up while thinking about how it's possible that he's still breathing. In front of him stands the blue-caped warrior, staring at him firmly, while deciding what the next step is. The protagonist smiles and, still thinking, states that the bastard really is handsome. Annoyed, the blonde warrior orders Zichmore to pay attention to what he is saying. He then warns that he will tell everyone all the bad things the young man has done. We find out that the young man annihilated hundreds of holy knights from the Order of Kuruaman, including good people. But his greatest atrocity surely was. The protagonist stops listening and can only think about how naturally the man talks. When he focuses again, he hears the warrior stating that it is for all those committed sins that his punishment will be death. Angrily, Zik reflects on how hearing all that nonsense from the guy irritates him, even though it's all true. But if he simply surrenders like this, it will be a waste of his title as Demon Lord. Soon, he will have to use the key that distorts fate to land one last blow on his unbearable opponent. We discover that the protagonist holds in his hands a blade that alters the target's fate and changes their future. The warrior in front of him prepares to deliver justice with his sword, stating that he hopes the young man can do good in his next life. In response, Zich says he will if given the chance, but it won't be today. We see that even after being struck, the young man was able to stand up. To say that he needs to do something first, with one hand behind his back, he starts activating the blade, making a shining purple light radiate through the surroundings. Looking into his opponent's eyes, our boy says this is his last strike. A hole appears in the blonde young man's armor and he doesn't understand what's happening. We see that tree roots start to emerge on his skin. Furious, he asks how the protagonist did that. With an evil smile, he replies that judging by how angry he looks, the trick must have worked. Not giving up, the blue-caped warrior strikes again with his sword, ending the demon lord's life. Thinking to himself, he says he died in vain but carries no regrets. We are taken to another place. Through a window, sunlight enters to signal that the day has just begun. In bed, Zich wakes up annoyed by the birdsong that interrupted his precious sleep. Suddenly, he realizes where he is, and becomes confused as he stares at his own legs covered by the sheet, then looking at his own hands, bringing them to his neck, where he had received the fatal blow. The young man decides to get out of bed quickly. Stopping in front of a mirror, that's when he realizes he is young again. Intrigued, he remembers the battle and says he is sure he lost to Glenn and his companions, and that he used the key that distorts fate on the boy before being dragged away. But he can't remember what happened after that. Looking around, Zich concludes that the only thing he knows now is that he has gone back to the past when he still lived with his family. So his next step must be to recover the key that distorts fate. Suddenly, the door to his room opens while the boy is in the middle of his mental confusion. Hearing footsteps, he wonders how someone dares to invade the room of the eldest son of a noble family. A blonde boy appears and, calling him his lord, asks why he hasn't left the room yet. Even without remembering who the young man is, Zich smiles upon realizing that at least the boy treats him with respect. The young man standing at the door then says that the protagonist usually goes out at dawn, since he is no longer in a position to sleep in until late. Raising his finger, our boy asks his servant to come closer. The young man immediately obeys and asks what he wants. In silence, the protagonist just stares at him firmly, then punches the boy hard in the face. With his hand on his cheek, the boy asks why the young man did that. But Zich approaches and we can see that he carries a dark look on his face, making the blonde boy realize that he is completely screwed. Suddenly, boots hit his body, throwing him hard to the ground. Furious, the protagonist starts stomping on his servant's head, while delivering kick after kick without stopping. Trying to get up, the boy asks for forgiveness through his tears, and we hear a voice asking what's happening. But it's no use, and the young man continues to beat the servant, stopping only when someone enters the room. The blonde boy quickly runs into the arms of Sir Halton. Standing there, the man states that he asked a question, which irritates the protagonist, who feels disrespected. Sighing, he decides to approach the boy and the man, who asks why the young man doesn't answer. With a mocking look, the protagonist says that Halton is a bit rude, and the man asks if he's going to beat him up too. Smiling, our boy says he doesn't see why not, since a bastard who does not recognize his master must be taught a lesson until he learns to treat authority with respect. The warrior then asks if he has the skill to carry out that threat. Backing off, Zich says the man is right since he cannot defeat him in his current state. But as a master, he cannot allow a mere bastard to be disobedient without receiving punishment. Furious, Halton asks if the boy even knows who he's talking to. Suddenly, a tablecloth flies toward him. With his head covered, the man struggles as he asks what trick that is. Desperate, the blonde boy screams the warrior's name. We see the protagonist appear in the air, ready to strike using a flower pot, which shatters into pieces as soon as it hits the man's head. Wiping his hands while watching his opponent on the ground, our boy says that strength isn't everything. And looking at the little blonde boy, he states that now he can go back to what he was doing before. We see the poor boy sweating cold as a fist flies toward his face. Outside the room, screams of someone calling for help are heard. Later, in another place, Zich stops in front of two huge doors. While remembering how scared he used to be to enter that room in the past, about to open the doors, he states that now he feels absolutely nothing. Inside, we see 5 people staring at him firmly, including the boy he beat and Halton, who has finally woken up after being struck. In the man's eyes, we can see rage in its purest form. He remembers earlier moments when a red-haired boy warned him that the matter had already reached his father, who was extremely disappointed to learn that a knight of the Steelwall house was taken down in such a ridiculous manner. We discover that the boy is Greg Steelwall, Zich's half-brother, who, placing his hand over the man's face, asks if he did something wrong and warns that if not, he should keep his head held high. After all, they are dealing with his half-brother. Back to the present moment, the man sitting on the throne says that the protagonist is late. The man is none other than Count Bordeaux Steelwall, the biological father of our boy. Snorting and rolling his eyes, Zich asks why he was summoned. Such an attitude makes his father narrow his eyes and ask if he has forgotten that you should treat him with respect. Not caring, the boy replies that he doesn't need to be respectful since the man doesn't even recognize that he is his father. Bordeaux then asks how he expects to inherit the title of Count with such deplorable behavior. The boy questions what his father is talking about when he mentions the word inherit, and whether he's really planning to recognize him as his legitimate son. Hearing this deeply irritates Lord Steelwall, but his wife places her hand on his shoulder, then says that she warned him about the boy's behavior. The woman is named Floral Steelwall and is Zich's stepmother. She says the protagonist has always been disrespectful and rude. Her words make our boy clench his fist because he clearly remembers how the woman and her son are cruel, and how they always tried to get rid of him. Changing his attitude, the boy bows and says it was all a misunderstanding, then calls the woman mother while smiling mockingly. Floral glares at him with bloodshot eyes. Zich then asks if he was called there because of Halton and the blonde boy, and turning his back, apologizes to his father, claiming that he made a mistake while picking up a sword. The boy and the knight watch everything, trying to understand what will happen next. Bordeaux widens his eyes, as does Greg, who starts sweating cold. The protagonist points the sword at the blonde boy and says he's going to clean up his mess right there. We discover that the young boy is named Hans, and he is a servant of the Steelwall family. The head of the family stands up and asks how the boy dares to draw a sword in front of him, making his other son smile. Turning around, Zich says that anyone who insults the heir of the Steelwall family must die, and that he thought that was the reason for the meeting. The boy's stepmother steps into the discussion to order the boy to stop, as she knows Hans never insulted him. Placing the sword on the ground, the protagonist then asks if they are saying that he is lying. The blonde boy, in a panic, thinks that if he says anything wrong, he's done for and no one will be able to stop it. Meanwhile, the demon lord can only reflect on why the Countess is protecting Hans like that. Stepping forward, Halton says that Hans is telling the truth, and that the protagonist is indeed lying. Zich smiles, revealing that he didn't expect that. Floral approaches and asks if the knight is sure. He replies yes, because the truth is that both he and the boy were attacked by the young man for no reason. Mocking, our boy says it's funny. The man admits he was attacked by someone like him, then asks if he also has no interest in admitting he was wrong. The man says he only told the truth. Zich then asks if Halton is really going to insist that he's innocent, and if that's the case, it should resolve this situation with a duel. Annoyed, the knight asks if the boy is being serious. With his sword pointed at the man, the protagonist asks his father if that isn't the right thing to do, then states that if he loses the duel, he will also lose the chance to be heir. His father then says he allows the duel to happen. Grinning, Halton says he will do whatever his lord orders, while our boy also smiles and thanks his father. Leaving, Zich asks to get informed of the time and place of the battle. Thinking to himself, Bordeaux says that he was just thinking about scolding his son and sending him back to his room. But this might be the perfect opportunity to give the position to Greg. Before leaving the room, the protagonist says he almost changed his mind, because he realized that even if he wins, he won't get what he wants. His father asks what he's referring to, and whether it's about the title of Count. The boy simply says there's nothing more to say because you would never understand, so in that case, he'll see him on the day of the duel. Outside the house while testing his abilities, Zich thinks about how he is now in the body of a 19-year-old boy, who in the past was very weak and naive and only cared about getting daddy's approval, and didn't even know how to handle a sword since the man wouldn't let him take fencing lessons. At that time, he had no idea of the massive and destructive power that was dormant inside him. We discover that each person has a limit to the amount of mana, but Zich's limit is extremely high compared to the limit of an average person. While using his power, our boy feels a pain in his chest. Suddenly, an explosion happens and throws him backward. On the ground, he thinks that as expected, it's impossible to immediately return to the mana level he had when he was a demon lord, since he had to go through many trials to achieve such a title. And it was remarkable how things kept happening to him one after another, almost as if everything had been planned by someone. Our young man decides to get up from the ground, then orders Grey to stop spying on him and leave. His half-brother wonders how he discovered his presence. Emerging from behind a tree, he asks if Zich has finally awakened his mana, and if he truly believes he can win the duel and inherit the title with those skills. Smiling, Grey also questions why his younger brother suddenly started acting so differently, instead of keeping his head down as he always did, in order to secure a reward later. The protagonist approaches his half-brother and stares at him seriously. With veins bulging on his face, he says he knows that Greg is afraid he will inherit the title, but the red-haired boy denies such an accusation, then states that if he cannot deal with someone like Zich, he should indeed give up on the title. Zich places his hand on the young man's shoulder and asks if he is certain about that, because in that case he will have to fulfill his older brother's wish and resolve the succession dispute in a more forceful manner, as he was raised. Pushing the protagonist's hand away, Grade asks if he is truly challenging him to a duel. Our young man then asks what his answer to the proposal is, and his brother replies that he has no reason to refuse. Walking away, the black-haired boy says that everything is settled then, and that he will choose the time and place. The day of the duel between Zich and Halton arrives. The man in the center of the battlefield shouts that he took the lesson he received seriously, but now it is his turn to teach the boy a lesson, and that today he will show that it is skill that determines victory or defeat. Holding his sword, our young man wonders what his opponent is talking about. Someone else slowly approaches. It is a knight with gray hair, who then asks if Halton is ready. The man promptly responds yes, while the protagonist looks at him mockingly. The knight then announces that the duel has begun. Without wasting time, Bai charges forward, and Zich decides to do the same. The two stop face to face, engaging in a sword fight. While blocking his opponent's strike, our young man remarks that despite everything, he is still a knight. Upon hearing this, something triggers in the man's mind, who immediately starts smiling. Raising his sword to deliver a fatal blow, he asks the boy, calling him Sir, how it feels. Now that he has realized that if they fight fairly, he will never be able to win, the sequence of strikes forces Zich to step back. Without hesitation, the knight delivers another attack, with his sword glowing in a reddish hue. Fortunately, the protagonist manages to defend, but it is evident that he has begun sweating cold, unlike Halton, who keeps smiling. In the reserve area, the members of the Steelwolf family watch the battle unfold. Our young man takes another hit, and a man tells Bordeaux that his son is performing better than expected, as he has already blocked several attacks. Floralyn says that even so, the knight still holds the advantage. The elder agrees, stating that in the end, Zich never properly learned the art of the sword, while the one glares at him furiously. The boy's father continues watching without saying a single word. In the audience, the crowd chants Halton's name, demanding that he finish the boy. Smiling, the knight asks if the protagonist can hear that, then states that now he has the duty to give the spectators what they want. With a different movement, the man breaks free from the boy's block, and about to deliver another strike, orders that if the boy wishes to keep his body intact, he must surrender immediately. Holding his sword, which shines in a shade of blue, our young man replies that surrendering is out of the question, because he is just getting started. In his mind, Zich reflects that he does not know if that trick will work, but he has to try. Halton, seeing the boy advancing toward him, is stunned, clearly realizing what is about to happen. Our young man then unleashes a strike called Extension of the Senses, which finally wipes the smile off the knight's face. Swiftly, the man does everything he can to dodge all the waves of light, managing to escape successfully, unlike the ground, which is now completely cracked. Still holding his sword, the protagonist starts trembling, because his mana is still unstable and out of control. The two stare at each other from a distance. Shocked, the spectators wonder if they really saw that, while the old family servant wonders if that was really the sense extension technique, a skill where the person synchronizes their body and sword with mana, moving it as an extension of their hands and feet. Sweating cold, Halton wonders in his thoughts when the boy learns such a technique, then concludes that even so, the way he uses mana still seems sloppy with movements out of sync. So since his opponent is just Zich Steelwall, it's time to stop playing. the man charges to attack again, with his sword releasing flames. He then aims his weapon at the protagonist, determined to end the fight, then launches a fierce strike. To his surprise, our boy dodges it with ease. Halton then reveals that he has one more little surprise, and while shouting that he wants to see the boy dodge this, he launches another strike. We see that this time Zich has no way out. A huge explosion happens due to the strike called piercing space. Our boy appears lying with his back in a crater that opened from the impact of his body. All the spectators start shouting, saying they expected nothing less from someone like Halton, who starts smiling while saying that the result has already been decided. So there's no reason for Zich to risk his life any further. Suddenly something hits the ground. It's the protagonist's sword who, getting up, says that with that body he cannot beat his opponent with techniques, but with real combat. Without hesitation, he charges at the knight at full speed, then drags his sword on the ground, which kicks up dust everywhere, including into the knight's face. The protagonist then takes advantage of his opponent being blinded to attack him with full force using his body, brutally slamming the man to the ground. Halton is still breathing and sits up while wiping his eyes. Annoyed, he says that strike was nothing more than a cheap trick, but suddenly realizes that the tip of Zich's sword is pointed at his neck. The boy then asks if he's going to say that after losing a battle in real life, while the knight glares at him. With no way out, he says he surrenders. Our boy then says that the only reasons he didn't win were his arrogance and fear of killing the eldest son of the Steelwall family. But if he learns the lesson, he can grow and become stronger. The gray-haired knight appears and prepares to declare the winner, leaving all the spectators anxious, as well as the protagonist's half-brother. The man then announces that the winner is Zich Steelwall. The outraged crowd starts shouting, saying it's unfair because the boy cheated, which goes against the knight's code. Mocking the protagonist, says what matters is winning. Up above, Bordeaux asks when his son learned to use mana techniques if no one ever taught him. At his side, the servant asks if he hasn't realized that Zich always had a natural gift. Furious, Greg thinks that it's impossible that his half-brother is still standing after the strike he received from the knight. But suddenly someone shouts his name. On the battlefield, the protagonist calls him down because it's time for the duel they scheduled, and that he warned you would choose the time and place. Crossing his arms, the head of the Steelwall family asks what he's talking about. In response, our boy asks why his father is pretending to be dumb if he already approved it. Confused, two young men say that then the rumors that the two brothers would fight for the Count title were true. They just don't understand how Zich wants to duel again if he's injured. Shouting, the protagonist asks what Greg is waiting for. He hasn't come down yet, since that kind of attitude just makes him look like a coward. The boy's father then orders him to come down, leaving him surprised. Bordeaux then asks if he's really afraid of fighting his half-brother who is injured. Not wanting to dishonor his father, the red-haired boy decides to come down. Approaching our boy, he wonders why he is smiling like that. And grabbing his sword, he still thinks to himself that he no longer recognizes his brother. Suddenly, Zich calls his name, then asks if he's standing there like an idiot because he's waiting for an attack from him. And that if that's the case, as the older brother, he'll take the first step. Grieg sees his brother approaching at high speed and starts sweating cold, but manages to block the first strike successfully, then realizes that something there isn't right. Since the protagonist isn't using strength in his attack, as he shouldn't have expected anything different from his brother, he decides to strike back, stating that he will be the heir of House Steelwall. Caught by surprise, our boy grits his teeth, concluding that due to his injuries, he won't be able to use mana again. So if he wants to finish this, there's only one way. Zich lets out a small laugh out loud, and we can see someone's strawberry juice start dripping onto the ground, being his own as he grabbed the blade of Greg's sword, asking him if he knows the March of Death. With his power activated and using only one hand, he breaks his younger brother's sword, leaving him speechless. With his darkest glare, the protagonist says that if Greg doesn't surrender now, this will be his last day alive, and without hesitation, strikes him with the hilt of the sword, right in the middle of his face. The red-haired boy ends up falling to the ground like a sack of potatoes, groaning in pain and missing a tooth. Suddenly, Zich stabs the sword into the ground right next to his head, and standing in front of him, stares at him in a terrifying way. Crying, the protagonist's half-brother says that he surrenders. The knight responsible for announcing the winner approaches, informing everyone that our boy has won again. The spectators are left speechless and in disbelief, while the black-haired boy, looking at his father, says that he won. So he must now fulfill his promise, and acknowledge that he is the legitimate heir to the title of Count. Furious, Bordeaux shouts, asking how a mere duel can actually decide anything. Someone then says that Zich won both duels and asks if the man will really break his promise in such a dishonorable way. Showing no surprise, the protagonist removes the family ring from his finger and throws it toward his father, stating that he never really wanted the title anyway. The ring spins until it stops at the foot of the head of the Steelwall family, who can only think about how reckless his son is. Stepping in, Floral begs her husband to stay calm, but the furious man shouts, asking what the meaning of that attitude is. Zich then declares that he is leaving the family from that moment on. Someone carries Greg out of the arena, but the boy calls him. to ask him to never forget that to win a fight, one must never fear death, especially with the borders of Steelwall County constantly under attack. So if he wants to protect his home, he will have to become stronger. The red-haired boy doesn't even look back, he just keeps walking away. Our boy follows his brother's servant and grabs a potion from his belt without asking. After drinking the liquid, his wounds begin to heal, as he prays that House Steelwall does not forget what it learned that day. Later, outside the mansion gate, Zich prepares to leave but decides that first he needs to pull something on Hans, who widens his eyes when he sees something coming his way. We go back a few hours earlier when the boy was carrying a basket of clothes and humming through the hallways, being interrupted by Zich, who stops right in front of him. Because it was dark, Hans asks who's there, and upon seeing the protagonist, he panics. But our boy says he will accept him as his servant, warning that if he refuses, he'll annihilate him right there. With no way out, the young man says he'll go with him. In the present moment, we discover that what hits the servant is the protagonist's suitcase, who orders him to carry his stuff. As they start walking, our boy thinks that he can't believe he's forgiving a servant who insulted him, all because he's too kind. Looking at Hans, he states in his thoughts that the boy will be useful, but first, he needs to increase his stamina and be trained. Out loud, the boy asks his servant to call him only Lord Zich from now on. The boy then asks what the plan is, but the demon lord says that nothing is defined yet, only that the first stop will be in Porty territory. After that, they'll go wherever life takes them, because now he will try to be a good person. Sometime later, farther away from home, Hans calls the protagonist's attention to say that this is not the path people usually follow. Zich says he knows, but that the original path is too winding, unlike walking in a straight line. The boy then says that monsters roam around those parts, but our boy states that's exactly why they came that way, making his servant start sweating cold. Suddenly, a noise catches the blonde boy's attention, who starts trying to convince himself that he must have just heard things. The two walk a bit further into the forest. Hans keeps freaking out in fear, wishing to get out of there as quickly as possible. Zich then calls him, snapping him out of his thoughts. Handing a sword into the boy's hands, the protagonist says it's time for him to test his skills. Not understanding, the young man asks what he's talking about, but our boy simply tells his servant to look behind him. Obeying, he turns around and immediately panics, because in the middle of the bushes, a creature with red eyes is lurking. It's a goblin who, upon seeing the boys, starts smiling, which makes Hans's legs begin to fail. Terrified, the boy says he doesn't know how to use a sword and asks if he could fight with a bigger weapon instead. Zich tells him to stop whining or else he'll get kicked, which might actually be a good thing in the end. Tired of all the chatter, the creature jumps to attack, making the servant scream and run back and forth, even though it's pretty small. Our boy then thinks that this will be more work than he expected. Suddenly, the goblin turns to face him. But before it can attack, the boy lands a strike and throws it back with force. We see that both the monster and Hans are lying on the ground. Standing up, the blonde boy shouts to ask why the boy is doing this to him, and he replies it's because the boy is weak. Therefore, he cannot be his servant if he's just a burden. Handing him a healing potion, Zich says he needs to train so he can protect himself, then warns him that the goblin was only knocked out and should wake up soon. Some time passes since the warning, and we can see several empty potion bottles on the ground. This time, Hans is standing, holding the sword like a warrior, ready to face the small monster in front of him. More confident, the boy charges forward at high speed, making the goblin smile at his attitude, which was kind of dumb since the monster, besides blocking the attack, also manages to hit the boy with its club. Annoyed, the servant stares into the creature's red eyes, which are also smiling along with its teeth. Showing that he's made some improvement, the young man manages to dodge his opponent's strike, with plenty of agility and precision. Zich widens his eyes, surprised by what he sees, while thinking that even though he's a novice, the boy seems to have some talent. The goblin keeps facing the wrong direction, not understanding where the boy went, and feels that he's about to be struck hard. Hans appears behind it, with blood in his eyes, and plunges his sword right in the middle of the little monster's head. Seeing his opponent fall, the boy sighs heavily, then looks at his own hands, wondering if he finally won. When he sees that he did, he starts jumping and shouting, feeling like a champion. Approaching, Zich hands him another potion bottle, then says that the boy exceeded his expectations. With a wide smile, he says it's all thanks to the boy. Suddenly, something catches the blonde's attention, and he drops the drink on the ground. He then asks our boy to look to the side. We see a horde of monsters furiously approaching. They're more goblins, brawling non-stop. Our boy watches them coldly, while his servant starts sweating cold again. Taking a few small steps forward, the protagonist crouches and picks up some rocks, then throws them all toward the monsters, leaving the blonde boy terrified and confused. The stones hit the goblins right on their heads, and we can see they get even angrier than before. But Zich remains standing without showing any reaction. Looking at Hans, he asks why he's so surprised if the fight is just beginning. Curious, the young man asks what the boy is talking about, but his master simply tells him to look behind. Upon seeing giant orcs, the servant turns completely pale, while our boy tells him not to worry because they have plenty of potions. Night quickly falls and the stars appear in the sky. We see that all the monsters have been defeated and the boys are resting by a campfire. Zich observes his servant completely passed out and snoring non-stop, remembering the conversation they had earlier when he asked why Floral protected the boys so much and what his relationship with the woman was. Hans replies that his grandmother was the Countess's nanny, so she has liked him since he was a child. The protagonist then says he remembers his mother tormenting a servant because he was the grandson of Floral's nanny. Leaving the boy embarrassed and curious, our young man asks what he thinks about his late mother, and he replies that the woman was a good person. She took very good care of all the servants, besides always treating the Count with respect. She was very kind and warm to everyone around her. Back to the present moment, while analyzing Hans' lie, Zich realizes that no one liked him at home because of his mother. Considering the way she treated everyone, even he feels a little bad for his father Floral and Greg, even though it's something he has no fault in. Suddenly, the sound of what seems to be a carriage catches his attention. Standing up, he wakes his servant with light kicks. The servant wakes up and says it's not morning yet, but the protagonist warns that something is approaching. Grabbing his sword, Hans asks if they are goblins or orcs. Soon after, he spots that it is actually a carriage. Zich puts him in front to lead the way. Sweating nervously again, the boy asks if it might be a merchant, but his master denies it because the sound of the vehicle's wheels is too soft for someone like that. The boy then says it can only be travelers like them, but the young man replies that no one would be traveling through the forest at that hour. Hearing the noise getting closer, the dude stays still, wondering who it could possibly be. Suddenly, footsteps approach the boys, and we can see that they belong to two knights and a horse. Intrigued, the protagonist wonders in his mind if they are holy knights. Someone begins to step out of the carriage and announces that they also plan to camp there that night. Our boy widens his eyes upon seeing who is speaking. The young woman, removing her hood, states that she is a follower of Karuna, and her name is Ain Lubella, the Saint of Mercy. Zich quickly remembers that the young woman is the saint who belongs to Karuna, the same one who helped the blonde knight kill him in his previous life. His biggest surprise is that he didn't expect to meet her there. Another person approaches and says it is a pleasure to meet the young man. It is Bellery Wag, Ain's assistant and candidate for Karuman's sainthood. Our boy quietly states that the man is the killing machine of Tasmia's troop. Then he shakes the man's hand because he promised to be a good person, which includes building different relationships with people from his past life. Being friendly, the young man says that there is plenty of space for everyone to camp there, and Bellery thanks him. Looking at Hans, the protagonist says that he should greet them as well. In the blink of an eye, the boy is already kneeling at the young woman's feet, introducing himself and showing he is a true suck-up. Quickly, the knights who accompany the newly arrived duo start setting up a large tent. One of the men then asks someone to hold one of the poles. Ain steps forward to help but is stopped by Hans, who says he will do the job with a cheeky smile on his face, and with nothing else to do, the young woman simply thanks him. Wasting no time, Zich's servant starts helping the knights, even though he is small compared to them. Smiling, the protagonist says that his servant really seems excited, which is totally understandable, since Ain is incredibly beautiful, and Glenzenard would never choose ugly women to be part of his team. Pulling the young man out of his thoughts, someone politely asks for permission. Very close to him, the young woman asks if she can sit by his side for a while. The protagonist says yes, and the saint thanks him for his kindness, and for letting her and her companions camp there. Being modest, the young man says it was no big deal, but his face shows slight discomfort with her getting so close. The young woman stares at him, noticing that the young man's about to say something. As expected, Zich asks what she is doing there, and she replies that she is just traveling the land. And whenever she finds those who are in pain, she offers prayers of blessings. Our boy says that she is doing a good job, but Ain says that she is only fulfilling her duty as a follower of Karuna. She then asks what he is doing there. Our boy replies that he is looking for a way to be a good person. Suddenly, a spark goes off in his mind, and he asks the young woman if she can tell him what should be done to be a good person. The girl looks intrigued, but the young man says that she is probably the best person he could ask that. Reflecting for a moment, the saint says there are many ways to be a good and kind person. She then asks if the young man has any special abilities. He says he is very good at using physical strength. Ain then says that he can use that strength to help people in need. Confident, Zich says that in that case, he will start looking for that kind of person tomorrow. The next day, everyone goes out to walk around the city. Accompanying the young woman, Bellery says that all the shops seem to be under construction, and she agrees. The man then informs her that he has received an order from Karuman and needs to fulfill it. Ain smiles and wishes him luck on the mission. He asks the young woman to take care, and she says she will do that. But later, somewhere else, we see that the girl is feeling distressed. Upon entering what seems to be an alley, she tells her knights that she heard a scream coming from there, and they say they will check it out. But suddenly, Ain sees something that shocks her. We see a young man getting beaten by someone, accompanied by others who are just watching. Approaching, one of the knights orders the aggressor to stop, while the saint can only think about how Zich could be capable of something like this. After the commotion, the two talk, and she says that she asked him to help people in need. So she doesn't understand why the boy went to help troublemakers. The protagonist states that he did that because the people seemed like they needed something to correct them. The girl orders that from now on, he must make sure to help vulnerable people and not use physical force, starting with an apology to the boy he hurt. Sitting at the table with a swollen face, the boy says he is fine. Introducing himself, the young man says his name is Soon, and that he is very grateful to Ain for saving him. Curious, the girl asks why he was being beaten, and if Zich and the other boys were trying to take his shot. Confirming, the boy says there is a group called Siren Corporation that is bribing people, including the mayor, to get what they want. But even if his shop seems old to others, it is very precious to him, because it is full of memories of his grandfather and father. So when he refused to give up the place, the group turned violent. Now he no longer knows what to do. Sympathetic to the situation, the young woman says that Soon doesn't need to worry anymore, since she will meet with the mayor of Porti immediately to resolve the situation. One of her knights then warns that Kuruman followers should not get involved in politics. But Ain says that as a follower of Kuruma, she cannot ignore that and promises to solve everything. The young woman quickly leaves the place and her guards run after her to accompany her, while Zich feels that something is going to go wrong. The next day, walking around the city, Hans asks what the protagonist is thinking. He replies that he is thinking about what the saint said about helping the vulnerable because he feels that she doesn't even understand that properly. Pinching his servant's cheeks, he says he is also worried about the fact that the young woman hasn't returned to the camp. Suddenly, the two boys spot a group of people looking at a notice posted on a wall about someone who is wanted. Curious, they decide to get closer, and hear the people commenting that the person in the portrait murdered the deputy mayor. Zich's eyes quickly widen, because the person drawn on the poster is Ain. Hans is shocked by what he sees, while our boy is certain that something is wrong. The townspeople keep saying that they heard around that the young woman is a witch from Kuruman, and that the city is in chaos because of the curse she cast, so it's better to hide at home during the night. Everyone starts running desperately to lock themselves in their homes, afraid of what is coming next. Worried, the protagonist's servant asks what he thinks happened. Our boy then says that something seems strange, so it's better if they leave too. Sometime later, the two are walking through the city, which is completely silent since nightfall. Zich tries to remember if something like this happened in his past life, but concludes that he has no memory of a curse being cast on Porti or of Ain murdering someone. His doubt is whether the events changed because he met the saint in this life. Suddenly, his servant calls his attention, warning that someone is following them. A leg that doesn't seem to be human approaches, and we can see that the creature is making strange noises. We discover that it is a zombie woman. Terrified, the blonde boy asks if that is really an undead, while our boy, without hesitation, charges at the monster, eliminating it in less than 5 seconds with his sword. On his knees, Hans asks why something like that was walking through the city. The protagonist then says he doesn't know, but something definitely doesn't seem right. Somewhere else, someone says they are relieved that there were no victims. With lit torches, two guards tell the boys that they will take care of the monster's body and thank them for their help. One of the men then says it's better for them to go inside and hands his torch to the blonde boy, warning them to be careful because they might be affected by the witch's curse. The guards leave, taking the undead with them. While the protagonist's servant asks if he really thinks Ain is a witch, the young man replies no, because he is sure that the real culprit behind the incident is using the young woman as a disguise. Curious, the blonde boy asks how he can be so sure. Zich says it's because Ain is, but he can't finish his sentence. His servant then questions if he knows something about the young woman that he isn't revealing. Our boy then bluffs and claims that you can tell just by looking at her face that she's a good person. Suddenly, he hears something, and quickly turns around to see what it is. Confused, Hans asks what the young man heard, but our boy doesn't say anything and just starts running in the opposite direction from home, quickly arriving at a structure not far from there. Appearing at the door, he finds Ain and asks what the young woman is doing in that place, while Hans stands there with his mouth wide open, seeing the girl cornered and hiding alone. All together, they return home. After a bath, the saint approaches and the protagonist asks if the clothes he lent her fit. The young woman confirms they do. Our boy then says that his servant went out to buy dinner and will be back soon. Then he asks where the knights who were supposed to protect the girl are. Ain just lowers her head and the boy asks if the men went on another mission. The young woman answers that it's all her fault. Tears start falling from her eyes as she says the knights are gone because of her. Without showing much reaction, the protagonist hands her the wanted poster with her face on it and asks if what happened has anything to do with what's written there. Desperate, the saint says she is not a witch. Zich then says that he knows that, surprising the young woman with his faith in her innocence. He continues, saying he knows she wouldn't do bad things, but he would like to know what happened to her since the last time they saw each other. Ain then says that she will tell him. We return to the fateful day when she managed to solve the shop boy's issue successfully, because unlike the mayor, who seemed like a greedy man, the deputy mayor was very trustworthy and responsible. That's when the man behind the mayor said they should offer a meal to the guests. So the mayor, after some hesitation, agreed to prepare dinner for everyone, even though he didn't really want to stay. Ain says that if it wasn't too much trouble, she would accept the invitation, because the Holy Knights were very, very hungry. Her only mistake was deciding to go see the mayor out of nowhere in the middle of the night. After the meal, they went to thank the man for his kindness, but upon entering his office, they realized something terrible had happened. Her knights quickly stood in front to protect her, while the mayor, surrounded by bodies, said that she saw something she shouldn't have. Shocked, one of the knights shouted, asking Ain to look at the back of the room, where the statue of Belu is floating, surrounded by a purple light. Ain then says that the mayor is a puppet of Belu. Smiling, the man says she finally figured it out. Nervous, the girl asks what he is plotting. Suddenly, the people on the floor start getting up, and the mayor reveals that he is offering her as a sacrifice to the statue. The zombies charge at the trio. The knights quickly begin to counterattack, protected by the saint's power. But Ain realizes that there are too many undead in that place, and that she probably won't be able to handle them all. One of her knights turns and asks if the young woman is okay, quickly realizing that one of the zombies was coming at her from behind. The man urgently asks her to look back, but seeing that there wouldn't be enough time, he decides to throw her backward and take the lead, taking the blow directly in her place. Sitting down, Zich asks if the young woman is really talking about Belu's followers. Confirming, Ain says the group served the evil god, desiring destruction and chaos and committing attacks in his name. Intrigued, the protagonist asks what they are trying to do in Porty. The young woman says she thinks they are planning a ritual, because she saw that the inscription on the statue behind the mayor said, "I offer the city to Belu." Our boy shows that he knows what it's about, and his friend asks what he is hiding. In response, the young man states that there are probably hidden statues around the city, and that the book the mayor was holding must be the catalyst, the one that activates their power. The saint then says that after escaping from the mansion, she tried to seek help at the Kuruman temple, but the city was closed and she couldn't contact anyone, starting to cry again. The young woman says that she needs to stop the ritual, and Zix says he will help her with that. Then he asks if that counts as a good deed. Ain says yes, but that she's worried because she might be putting him in danger. Our boy then asks her not to worry about him, saying that the following night they will go to the mayor's mansion, so the girl should go back to her room and get some rest. When he opens the door, the protagonist discovers that Hans was listening to the conversation, but he blatantly denies it. Not caring, Zich says that actually is a job for him, whispering the plan very quietly into his ear, far from Ain. Whatever it is, the servant is left in shock. The next day, during the night, we see two men lying unconscious in the backyard of the mayor's mansion, while our boy and his ally enter the house through one of the balconies. Carrying the young woman, the boy asks if she's okay, and she says yes. The two quickly move through the hallways, stopping in front of the door where the saint last met the mayor. The young woman says that the statue was there, and the protagonist states that he can feel something evil behind the doors. Without waiting any longer, the duo enters the room, finding the mayor facing one of the windows surrounded by purple light. Ain then says that it was the man who killed the deputy mayor. Moving forward, Zich charges to attack, cornering the man with his sword, but he shows no reaction, which confuses the boy. Worried, the saint asks him to be careful because undead may appear. Placing his foot on the mayor's back and pushing him, the protagonist says that she accused the wrong person, because the man who just fell to the ground is not the mastermind. Ain is shocked because she was sure she was right. Suddenly, a purple aura starts coming out of the mayor's mouth. Smiling, Zich says they just found the real culprit behind all the chaos. The person approaches and says he didn't expect the young woman to return on her own. We discover that the real villain is actually the deputy mayor, who was never dead. Shocked, the young woman says she was sure the man was no longer among them, quickly realizing that he is, holding the book that possesses Belu's power. With a dark look, the deputy mayor says that the book is the key to the offering ritual, and the girl asks how he got it. Zich says that now he understands the situation and that the mayor must have been following someone else's orders until he was taken down, being just a puppet, not a follower of the evil god. And the one who controlled everything from the beginning was the deputy mayor himself. Sweating, and says that this cannot be true, then asks what the man did to the holy knights. Laughing, he says she doesn't need to worry about that anymore, since their bodies became fish food. His only doubt now is about who the boy next to the young woman is and if he's some kind of secret guard. Zich then reveals that he has nothing to do with Kuruman. Intrigued, the deputy mayor asks what he is doing there then. The boy replies that he doesn't need to explain anything to someone who believes in a fish head. Annoyed, the man asks if he really said that, because he's asking to be punished by Belu. Smiling, our boy asks why he would be punished by a fish head, awakening the man's fury, who declares that he will pay for his blasphemy until his last breath. The undead appear, and the deputy mayor screams, ordering them all to finish the boy and keep Ain alive. Without hesitation, the creatures charge to attack. To help, the saint blesses Zich, while asking him to be careful. With his skill activated and protected by the young woman, the boy is able to beautifully dodge the strikes, counterattacking one by one, with his sword glowing blue. Seeing his minions being defeated, the man holding the book thinks that this can't be possible, since no one should be able to annihilate undead so easily. Meanwhile, the protagonist realizes that he has recovered some of his mana. Mocking, he asks the man if he isn't going to summon any more monsters. Trembling with rage, the deputy mayor says that the boy's arrogance won't help him here because the preparations for the ritual are already complete. Six then says that he doubts it, leaving his opponent stunned by such audacity. With a smirk, the boy states that he will find and destroy all the statues hidden around the city. The man says he won't be able to do that, but our boy says that a member of Karuaman surely can, revealing that he knows the deputy mayor protected the statues up to a certain point. Ain steps closer and asks if that's really possible, confirming the boy says that after destroying all the statues in Porti, they only need to return to the mansion and destroy the last one. Furious, the follower of Belu says that he is nothing but filthy trash, then orders the undead to rise and attack again. Quickly, Zix draws his sword once more and strikes the creatures non-stop, leaving his opponent even angrier and his ally worried. Moving to Ain's side, he picks the young woman up in his arms, asking her not to move so she won't get hurt, because they are getting the hell out of there. Sweating, the girl says the entrance is blocked. The protagonist starts running toward the window while she asks him to wait a minute. Without hesitation, the boy crashes through the glass with his back, making sure his friend doesn't get hurt, while the deputy mayor concludes that he has lost the duo. So it's better to review his evil plan. The next day, someone shouts through the city while spreading posters warning that the witch Ain killed the mayor. The residents quickly gather and pick up the papers thrown on the ground, shocked by hearing such news, and confused when seeing an unknown person drawn on the poster. We discover that it's Zich, who is being accused of being the witch's subordinate. Looking at his own wanted poster, our boy says that his drawing looks great, and that not even that scribble can hide how handsome he is. There's only one thing that seems strange. While biting a piece of bread, the boy concludes that the deputy mayor must have gotten lazy to draw it better, then asks Ain to stop worrying since they need to eat first. The young woman asks where he got the food, and the boy reveals that he borrowed it from somewhere, since he had no other option given that no one can see his face. Falling to her knees, the girl sighs, and our boy then says that he didn't steal anything, because he took the food on credit. Looking at him, the young woman asks if doing that doesn't require the owner's consent. Zix then claims that she can't always want to live by the rules, but that he will go back to the place later and pay double the price as an apology. The girl then asks where Hans is, and the boy says that he sent him on a mission, one that he definitely didn't enjoy doing at all. While eating bread, Ain asks where they are going now, and the protagonist says that the next step is to find the statues. A bit lost, the girl asks if he knows how to find them. Our boy then says they should start with the slums because he has a place in mind. Later, they arrive at that place. We can see three young men gathered in an alley. Zich approaches and, catching the boy's attention, says that it's been a while. Desperate, the three start screaming when they see Ain saying that she's the witch and that the boy is indeed her subordinate. They all start running immediately afterward. Determined not to let them get away, the protagonist jumps into the air, landing right on top of one boy and in front of the other two to block their escape. Smiling, he says they don't need to run because he's not going to bite them. The two boys stand there in disbelief, mouths wide open, afraid they're going to die right there. Looking at their faces, the saint says she recognizes them from the day when Soon was beaten up. Zich notices that the third boy is about to run away, quickly turning to ask if he's the kind of person who abandons his own friends, putting his hand on his head, having no way out. The boy says that they're criminals and that being seen with them in public will only get him in trouble. With a grin, the protagonist says he doesn't need to worry about that because he's looking for someone to join his team. On the ground, the boys ask why they should help him but quickly change their minds when they find out they will be very well paid for the job. With their eyes sparkling, the three step closer and ask how they can help. Starting the interrogation, Zich asks if they know anyone who suddenly got sick or died unexpectedly, as if their life force had been drained. Two of the boys look at the red-haired boy, who turns around claiming that he doesn't know anyone like that. The protagonist then asks why he's hiding something if he's getting paid for the information. Without getting an answer, he grabs the boy, locking his neck to see if that stimulates his memory. Even so, the boy keeps saying that he doesn't know anything. Surprising everyone, Ain approaches and kneels down to humbly ask the boy to say what he knows. Looking at the young woman, our boy asks what she's doing. Responding, the saint tells the boys that it's hard to believe, but the city is in danger and needs to be saved, because it could turn into a city of death overnight. Yelling, the red-haired boy says it's her fault that the undead are walking around, and that if it weren't for Ain, his brother wouldn't be sick, finally revealing what he was hiding from everyone. Zich asks the boy to take them to his brother, but he refuses, asking why. Annoyed, the protagonist simply grabs the boy again and invites himself to go to his house, far away in a cabin that looks abandoned. The saint says she did everything she could, but the sick boy won't be able to recover until the root of the problem is found. The protagonist then asks the red-haired boy if anyone approached his brother. Confirming, he says yes, and that he saw with his own eyes who attacked the boy. Our boy asks who it was. Narrowing his eyes, the young boy asks how he doesn't remember if he's seen the person before, revealing that it was the shop owner, the one our boy helped beat up Soon. Shocked, Ain asks if he's sure, and the boy says yes, that it was the guy she saved who made his brother sick, and that if it hadn't been for the young woman, he could have done something to help. Zich then asks the boy to calm down and explain in detail what happened, because he needs to fully understand how everything occurred. Going back to the past, he says that one day he arrived home later than usual and didn't find George. Since he is a fragile child, he quickly went out looking for him, afraid that something might have happened. As he approached an alley, he heard a voice and saw someone attacking his brother with some kind of power. The masked person also saw him and started to run away, but he chased after him and managed to catch up. That's when he managed to pull off the guy's mask while asking what he had done to his brother. Discovering that the hooded person was Soon, Zich then asks if his brother got sick starting from that day, and the boy confirms, stating that because there were no wounds and the boy regained consciousness, he thought everything was fine. But then George started getting thin and kept saying he had no energy, fainting shortly after. The protagonist asks if that's why the boy asked for his help. Confirming, he says that he was trying to steal Soon's dagger to make a deal and ask in return for his brother's cure. But his plan was ruined by Ain. Saddened, the young woman apologizes, saying she misunderstood the situation because she thought a vulnerable person was being attacked. The boy asks if she thought that because several people were beating up Soon, or because he was from the slums, or maybe because he looks like a thug, catching the young woman off guard as he asks if that's how she distinguishes the strong from the weak. Zich steps in and says that's enough, then states that the young woman spent her life being protected and therefore doesn't have much experience with the real world, then asks why the boy doesn't hate him too, since he betrayed him after Ain showed up. The boy replies that it was because it was the first time that someone helped them without caring about their condition. The revelation leaves our boy speechless. Leaving the cabin, he asks what his ally thinks about the situation. She says that she definitely felt the filthy energy of Bellu and George, and that it's clear the boy is an offering. Zich says that in that case, they should start from there, revealing that he has discovered something. We are taken to the shop, where Soon is carrying boxes back and forth. Suddenly, the boy feels something strange. And opening the basement door, he decides to go down and check. Reaching the back of the place, he realizes it might have just been a rat. But suddenly, the protagonist appears behind him and asks if the boy remembers him. Thinking to himself, the young man wonders what our boy is doing there. Quickly explaining, Zich says that he didn't manage to finish beating him up last time, so he came back to finish the job. But now he won't be interrupted, since the guardian angel who protected him last time returned as an angel from hell. Soon is thrown hard to the ground and screams in pain. Then he begs the protagonist to spare his life while asking what he did. Our boy tells him to ask the fish head behind him, saying that maybe the boy needs to get beaten a little more to remember. Injured, the shopkeeper asks if Zich thinks he's a follower of Bellu, saying with conviction that he is not. However, the protagonist says he knows that he's not a follower, but rather a bastard who hangs around the group picking up what they leave behind. Ain keeps watching the scene, showing that she is sad about it all. Suddenly, her eyes widen, because her ally has drawn his sword. Our boy says that now that they found the statue, they don't need Soon anymore. Desperate, the boy then says that he knows where the others are, referring to the location of the other statues. Grabbing the shopkeeper by the collar, the protagonist orders him to speak immediately, but Soon smiles and says that he can't just give the information for free, not without a guarantee that he'll get out of there alive. Seeing Zich's face, he asks why he's looking at him like that, and if the boy has finally understood the situation. Furious, the protagonist says that he belongs to the useless scum and that he should have killed him much earlier. Ain asks if the shopkeeper is really that bad, and he replies by asking if she thinks he's some kind of idiot. Insulting the girl, he also says that's why everyone's calling her a witch. Sad, the saint asks why he's doing those things, since he said before that he wasn't a follower of Bellu. Replying, Soon says that he's doing everything for money and that he hated his old, moldy shop, just like everything his father and grandfather passed down to him. So if he grabbed the only chance, he gotta get rid of it all. Zich interrupts him and tells his ally that they're wasting time, while the shopkeeper demands that he let him go, and let him leave safely if he wants to know where the other statues are. Our boy then says it's a shame because he just changed his mind, deciding to finish him off right there and then, since he can figure out the location himself, as it's clear that the boy is blatantly bluffing. Soon says he won't accept that, and desperately starts begging Ain to stop the protagonist because he is a vulnerable person. The saint remains silent, thinking about what to do, then asks Zich to get rid of the boy. Screaming, he keeps begging to be spared, suddenly stopping, giving the impression that he's no longer among the living. Ain shows signs of feeling sick after seeing the scene, but approaching the girl, the protagonist tells Soon that if he sees him again, he will wish he were dead, leaving and abandoning the boy lying on the ground injured, so scared that he almost soils himself. The duo returns to the red-haired boy's cabin. We see the young woman sitting on the porch, reflecting alone. Suddenly, our boy approaches and offers her some bread, then asks if she's okay. Ain then says that she has been making wrong judgments the whole time, because even in Soon and Timmy's situation, her prejudices spoke louder, something that Karuna taught her never to do. Zich asks if she's fighting guilt and says that she doesn't need to feel that way. The young woman then apologizes for the way she acted in the past and says that she should be the one asking him for advice. Eating the bread, the boy says that he has nothing to offer besides what she already knows, besides the fact that his words wouldn't do her any good. So it's better for Ain to find a way to overcome what happened on her own, whether by accepting it or letting it go, because holding on to guilt for too long will only make her feel worse and worse. The saint then says that he's much more mature than she thought. Zich asks what she said, and she quickly deflects, claiming it was nothing, and that they should go look for the other statue soon. With a saddened expression, the girl apologizes for having helped so little, but our boy asks her not to be so silly, since from that moment on, she will have the most important role, Night falls, bringing with it a storm. In an unknown house, Ain asks how Zich knew that the fallen men would be there. Explaining, the boy says that they were all hired with promises of money, just like Soon. But now she must hurry and fuse her holy power into the brush to then paint the statue. The young woman quickly obeys and the brush lights up, in shades of bright yellow. When she finishes, she says the process is done. The protagonist thanks her, and shortly after, he says that he's also finished. We see that the statue is now covered with drawn symbols. Placing her hand over the stone, Ain adds the finishing touches. When finished, she asks if they should leave. The boy then says that her power has already flowed into the underground waters, so everything will be fine, and they should head to the next place. Looking back, the young woman wonders if that will be enough to stop the ritual. Meanwhile, at the mayor's mansion, the person responsible for the ritual is sitting at his desk, with power flowing through his body. Observing the wanted posters he drew and spread around the city, staring at Ain's poster, he smiles wickedly, hoping the young woman returns soon. Far away in another place, we see someone running while carrying another in their arms. It's Belry and Hans, who warns the man that he's going to vomit. The man then stops abruptly, and throwing the boy to the ground, tells him that he'll have to continue without him. Screaming, the boy says that he can't just leave him there, but it's too late. We see red eyes appearing in the bushes behind the boy. Scared, he starts running and shouting the man's name. Meanwhile, Zich and Ain are walking through the city. Worried, the girl keeps wondering if the plan will work, revealing that it's been days since they've been walking around finding and painting statues, but she doesn't know what the magical symbols in the paintings are. Suddenly, the duo hears a scream, and they come face to face with a zombie. The protagonist asks if the monster doesn't seem different from the others, with much slower movements, which means their efforts weren't in vain. After defeating the monster, Zich says that the number of undead wandering the city is also much lower, all thanks to Ain. Smiling, the young woman says she's relieved, while our boy watches her, smiling as well. Then asks if she thought the magic circles wouldn't work. Embarrassed, the young woman says it's not that she doesn't trust him, she just had never heard of that method, let alone that it was such a powerful technique. Trying not to reveal that he was the one who created it, the protagonist says that anyway. It's already time for them to go find the main statue at the mayor's mansion. Since now that all the statues have been painted, the power of the ritual must be much weaker. And the deputy mayor is probably there, right at the center of everything. Grabbing her weapon, Ain says that. Then they should go there right now. Quickly, the duo arrives at the place and enters without even knocking. Standing again in front of the large doors, the young woman states that she can feel strong currents of energy coming from inside the room. Zich then asks his ally to stay behind him because he's taking the lead from this moment on. Without hesitation, the boy opens the door, entering stealthily and cautiously. Suddenly, a beam of purple light appears, hitting and shattering a window behind Ain, who gets scared. The protagonist reveals that it caught him by surprise while his friend asks if he's okay. Replying, the boy says yes, and that it wasn't a big deal. The most important thing is the fact that he didn't sense the presence of the creature holding a scythe earlier. Nervous, Ain asks why high-level monsters are there. The monster, which looks like a Dementor, charges at the duo again without hesitation. But Zich manages to defend himself using his sword, stating that the only thing the monster is good at is killing people. The two engage in a brief battle, but the protagonist quickly strikes with consecutive blows, finishing the enemy off. Other creatures start to rise from the ground. Worried, Ain asks the protagonist to look behind. We see that the monster is about to strike a fatal blow with its scythe at the boy, who notices in time while saying that his opponent's assassination skills aren't that bad, and could even be effective if it weren't him they were fighting. With what seems to be the end of the battle, the young woman asks how shadow monsters could have appeared there. The boy then says that the creatures must have been summoned by Bellu, making the girl even more nervous. Suddenly, the deputy mayor approaches and says there's only one reason for that it's because his ritual hasn't lost its power as she thought. The mansion starts collapsing, and Zich states that the ritual must be starting. With wide eyes, Ain asks if their efforts didn't help at all. Calming her down, the young man says that they will help, but first they need to get out of there. Grabbing his sword and activating his power, the young man literally starts breaking an exit right in the middle of the floor, causing a slight explosion to happen. Grabbing his ally, he asks her to hold on tight and starts running towards the improvised exit while everything collapses around their heads. Amidst the debris, the statue of Bellu appears glowing, seemingly floating on its own, revealing that it is on top of a large amount of water. As he approaches, the deputy mayor asks if the pair doesn't think that is beautiful, which makes Ain very irritated. Unbothered, the man asks why the young woman doesn't call him by his real name, which is Alid Grodum, then asking if the girl has that face because of the beginning of the ritual. Mocking, he says that the strange markings they made on the statues were completely useless. Surprised, the saint asks how the man knows about the drawings. Explaining, Alid says that it was all part of his plan and that he left the statues there for them to find, also that she would join him. And since it wasn't hard to lure them there, he only needed to make sure they would come back on their own. To do that, it was enough to make them believe that interrupting the ritual was going well. because he knew they would go after the last statue since someone warned him that this would happen. Ain is shocked by everything she heard. While Zich asks if he was actually spying on them, the man then says that the young man should be thanking him, since he designed the posters sloppily to make it easier for the protagonist to walk around the city. Now, in a matter of hours, the people of the city will become part of his loyal army, where Ain is more than welcome. The saint gives Alad a look of contempt, saying that she won't allow him to do whatever he wants. Smiling, the man says that in that case, he has no choice but to use good old brute force. Looking at Zich, the young woman thanks him, leaving the young man confused. Explaining, she says that if it weren't for him, she wouldn't be there now, so she will do her best to hold off the zombies while he escapes. Annoyed, the deputy mayor says that she should be mad at the boy who put her in that mess knowing the truth. Our boy then reveals that he always knew the magic circles had no effect, just as he knew that Alad was doing all this to lure Ain to Belad. The man claims that he's bluffing because otherwise he wouldn't have brought the girl there again. Smiling, the protagonist says that he did it to buy time. Leaving the Emmy completely confused, the boy explains that he was buying time for someone the man should recognize well, because his friend is from Tasnias. A little further from there, we see Belry fighting several zombies, wiping out every single one of them, living up to his nickname of Killing Machine. Alad says that the man couldn't have come back because he's sure he left Porty. Smiling, Zich says that he asked Belry to return. Furious, the deputy mayor activates his power, shouting that no matter how strong the man is, it's all over if he gets caught in the ritual. The underground water starts gushing nonstop, and from within it emerges a huge blue sea serpent. The protagonist then asks Ain not to panic and to stay behind him. But the young woman activates her power with her staff, saying that even if she is weak, she will fight by his side. Smiling, Zich says that hearing that is comforting. Prepared and blessed, the young man charges into battle, striking the great serpent with his sword, right in the center of its mouth. We see water flying everywhere, while Alad watches everything from up close. Seeing that the pair disappeared, the man says that his trick consumed a lot of energy, but at least it was effective. Suddenly, someone starts coming out of the middle of the water, and we see that both the protagonist and Ain are more than fine. Shocked, the deputy mayor asks how that is possible. Answering, our boy says that even a huge water column can be turned into a waterfall if the pressure is dispersed. Suddenly, we see someone approaching. It is Belry, who has finally arrived. Keeping his posture, Alad stammers, claiming that the man will also be an offering for the sacrifice, but ends up being struck immediately to learn to shut his mouth. Dropping his book on the ground, we see that the book has a bizarre face, which becomes even uglier when it is struck by Belry's sword. The man then says that, as expected from a Belu artifact, it is repulsive to the end. The base of the statue that was floating before falls heavily into the water, leaving everyone surprised by the loud crash. Smiling, the deputy mayor says that finally the day of final judgment has begun. The newly arrived warrior says that this is impossible since the key to the ritual was destroyed. But the enemy states that if enough vital force invades the city's underground waters, the ritual starts automatically, and it cannot be stopped until it swallows the entire place, making waters filled with Belu's energy emerge from the ground. Upon hearing this, the trio of heroes remains silent. After a little while, Alad wonders why nothing is happening. Zich then says that the magic circles he drew on the statues were real, and they had the power to interrupt the ritual. Mocking, the boy asks the man how it felt to have a sweet moment of hope. The next day, we see that the city is safe and sound. Belry thanks the protagonist for his help, because thanks to the note sent by Hans, he knew that Ain was in danger, so he's happy that he arrived in time. Our boy says that he planned everything, taking into account the time it would take for him to return, putting his servant through some tough moments. Saying goodbye, Zich says that he needs to go, and the young woman says that he can rest a little longer if he wants. Refusing the offer, the boy states that he's in a hurry, because he has already decided what his next destination with Hans will be. Inside the temple, the saint talks to Belry and says that she discovered the protagonist is the eldest son of the Steewall house. Shocked, the man asks if she's talking about the house known as the Fortress of Steel. Smiling, the girl says yes, but she's not sure if Hans wasn't just joking. Putting his hand on his chin, the man says that in any case, it's better to hide the boy from the order, because if they find out that he taught them the magic circle to interrupt the Belad ritual, they will come after him for revenge. Ain says that hiding Zich is a wise choice. Belry then asks for permission since he needs to meet with the Pope, and the young woman thanks him again for his help. Suddenly, we see that someone was lurking. Approaching Ain, the knight responsible for annihilating our boy in his past life asks for permission. Intrigued, the young woman asks who he is. Smiling, the boy says his name is Glenn Zenard. Seeing the emblem on the young man's armor, the girl says that he must be the honorary knight who came to help the order. Bowing, the boy says that it is an honor to serve the Order of Karuaman. Curious, Ain asks how he knows her. Answering, Glenn says that other people told him that she is a candidate for Saint of Karuaman. Then he asks if she has any problems because he can help with whatever it is. A bit embarrassed, the young woman says she has no particular concerns and is just tired. The knight then apologizes for keeping her there instead of letting her go rest. Saying goodbye, Ain says it was a pleasure to meet him. Watching the young woman walk away, the boy gives a dark look and states that something has changed. Meanwhile, near the mining town of Seoul, we see a troll being brutally beaten by Hans, who is holding a sword and breathing heavily. Zich approaches and says that now taking down a troll feels like child's play. Suddenly, the pair hears someone screaming for help. We see a little boy running from a horde of goblins. Without thinking twice, Zich charges forward and wipes out the creatures, leaving the little boy quite surprised. Getting closer to the men, he thanks them for the help. Hans then asks why he was being chased by goblins. Answering, the boy says that he was in the middle of an adventurer training, leaving our guys quite confused. Explaining, the little boy says that right now he is a miner, but his dream is to become an adventurer. That's why he's been training with a teacher. Out of nowhere, the man appears yelling, showing how irritated he is that his student couldn't handle mere goblins. Before leaving, the little boy asks what the protagonist's name is so that he can repay him one day. And before getting an answer, he says that his name is Snock. Zich introduces himself, and the young boy says that he'll see him around. Hans asks what an adventurer even is, but our boy says that doesn't matter, because they need to get back to what they were doing. Looking at his servant, he asks him to try fighting the creature behind him, which is a huge orc. Elsewhere, we see Snock and his teacher. The man then orders the boy to activate his mana as they walk. But before he could do that, he trips over a rock and falls. Annoyed, his teacher asks how many times he's going to fall. Because he's getting tired of this, we see that the poor boy scraped his knee. Out of patience, the man says that today's training is over, leaving Snock surprised. Worried, the little boy says he needs more training, but it's no use. Out of nowhere, a cute mole catches his attention, knowing it's dangerous for the little one to stay there. He asks her to go back to her family. Snock starts to walk away, but the little mole starts following him. Turning around, he asks if the little animal has nowhere to go, then wonders what he should do, finally deciding to take the little mole with him. Elsewhere, in a restaurant, Zich is having dinner with Hans, who reveals that he has a question. The boy then asks why the young man decided to go to Seoul and why he chose that city as their next destination. Our boy then says it's impressive that his servant remembers that, and Hans replies that he's not that stupid. Answering the boy's question, the protagonist says it's because the day is approaching, but that he wouldn't understand even with an explanation. So let's just say that it's the day Seoul is destined to be destroyed by Noen, the god of destruction. We return to Snock, who walks through the city while trying to decide on a name for his new pet, deciding that the little mole will be called Noen. From that moment onward, we are taken to a dark cave, where the little boy's teacher is talking to a mysterious figure, who thanks him for his help, then hands over a sack of gold coins. The man's eyes sparkle when he sees the money. Curious, he asks if the job is done since he led Snock to the mole. The hooded figure says yes, and the man replies that he can finally stop pretending to be a teacher. Agreeing, the mysterious man thanks him for the help, saying that thanks to him, he will be able to proceed with his plan immediately. The next day, a merchant tells Hans that this is a stone that only appears once every 1,000 years. Shocked, the boy asks if he's sure. Suddenly, a saleswoman shouts to catch his attention, saying that a blouse would look beautiful on him, while a man offers him grilled meat with special sauce. Giving in to his desires, the boy grabs everything, approaching Zich, asks how he looks in the new clothes. Our boy wonders how his servant managed to hold back for so long. Next to him, an old man says he knew Snock would be tricked sooner or later. Another guy says he heard that the so-called adventurer teacher resigned the day before, leaving the little boy so sad that he doesn't even want to leave the house. Hearing the conversation, the protagonist realizes that he's heard that name before, immediately remembering the little boy he met the other day. Reflecting, the boy concludes that he felt a strange energy coming from the man, and it can only be because he was a fraud. Suddenly, Hans appears again carrying a bag of food, asking the boy to try it. Later, at Snock's house, we see the little boy lying in his bed, with deep dark circles under his eyes. No one approaches, and he asks if the little pet is bored. Being cute, the mole snugbles into his hand. The boy then says that she's lucky not to have to worry about anything. Suddenly, the little animal raises her paw, then climbs onto Snock's face, and he asks if she's getting revenge for being bored. Suddenly, a noise catches the boy's attention. He is out of bed to see what's happening. Going to the door, he wonders why it opened by itself. Deciding to just close it, even though he feels someone else is in the house, we can see that someone in a hood is behind him. Meanwhile, Hans and Zich are walking through the city. Smiling, the boy asks if the food he gave him isn't really good. While eating, our boy asks if he can not wear those clothes. A little sad, the servant asks why, since the shopkeeper said the blouse looked good on him. Suddenly, the protagonist sees something running on top of one of the buildings. It's two hooded figures, and one of them is carrying Snock unconscious. Hans asks what that is, and his master says they are people. But we realize that he clearly recognized the little boy being carried. And feeling that he's being kidnapped, he decides to follow the figures because it might be a chance to do a good deed. Stopping the blonde boy, he orders him to go home. Because there's something he needs to do, Hans asks the boy to wait, but it's already too late. Zich runs and jumps across the rooftops of the houses, shouting to catch the kidnapper's attention. With no response, he asks if he can talk to them for a bit, because he needs to speak with the boy who's being carried. Suddenly, one of the hooded figures throws a dagger in his direction. Nimbly, he manages to catch the object with his hand, sending it back to the one responsible. Surprisingly, the protagonist hits one of the men directly, who ends up falling off the building along with Snock and another hooded figure. Standing in front of the kidnappers, Zich asks who they are. Since no one answers, the boy repeats the question, pointing his finger. One of the men orders the others to eliminate the obstacle, and without hesitation, the subordinates charge forward, which irritates our boy since he didn't want to kill anyone. Grabbing one of the men, he says that he asked a question, throwing the mysterious figure hard to the ground while asking why the man couldn't just answer. Suddenly, another man approaches and prepares to attack, but Zich dodges masterfully and counterattacks immediately with his knee. On top of the building, we see that the third kidnapper took advantage of the situation to escape with Snock. Quickly realizing what's happening, the protagonist says that the man is indeed making things harder. Without hesitation, he runs after the third figure. While wondering where he is going, he quickly discovers that the kidnapper is heading toward the abandoned mine. Before he could enter, something stops our boy. A horde of hooded people. Impatient, Zich asks who they are. But once again, no one answers. They simply attack. Sometime later, we see that the protagonist has taken care of the entire group, and his cheek is stained with strawberry juice. Looking at his opponents, he thinks that their weapons and skills are very good, so he urgently needs to find out where they came from. Since he came to the city to prevent an imminent disaster, then nothing here can be a coincidence. Suddenly, something catches his attention. One of the hooded figures starts to get up and quickly approaches, and asks if their presence there has anything to do with Nauen, the Tyrant of the Earth. We return inside the mine, where Snock wakes up from his fainting. Standing up, he sees his mole by his side, and wonders where he is. Out of nowhere, the hooded figure appears and snatches the little creature from his hands. Desperate, the boy begs the man to leave Nauen alone, but the kidnapper grabs his neck, and lifting him off the ground says that this is interesting, because he thought Snock was a coward. Smiling, the man asks if he gained courage because of his relationship with the mole, then throws the little boy hard to the ground. Trying to get up, he asks what the man is talking about. Quickly realizing that he knows this place well, it's the collapsed well. Approaching, the man asks what's wrong, and if he's looking for something that's on the other side of the barrier. Snock turns around and the kidnapper says that the boy must be wondering how he knows about that, stating that it wasn't hard to figure out given his desperate and sad eyes. When he came face to face with his own father's grave, intrigued, the boy asks if the man knew his father. Saying yes, the mysterious figure asks the little one to look at a shining point ahead, then explains that is the sealing stone responsible for imprisoning the monster of the mine. A stone that the boy's father accidentally disturbed while exploring, and as a result awakened the monster, causing the entire tunnel area to collapse, burying his father in the process. Provoking, the man asks if knowing this doesn't fill Snock with rage, since the reason he lost his father and the reason he became a miner, even though he hates it, is none other than the monster of the mine. The boy starts trembling and his eyes glow red. Returning the mold to the boy, the man asks him to unleash his rage on the little creature in front of him. Confused, Snock asks what his pet has to do with any of this. Replying, the man reveals that the mole is the monster that caused the earthquake, and that it killed his father by burying him. The man even says that the little mole had the audacity to get close to him and pretend to be part of his family, so the boy should hurry up and serve justice with his own hands. Reaching his limit, Snock awakens. Meanwhile, Zich is running outside the mine, because the group he defeated self-destructed the moment he mentioned Nauen. Using a very sophisticated method that shows knowledge of fire magic and of magical artifacts, our boy can only think about how everything is connected to Nauen, but he needs to figure out who is controlling everything. Suddenly, someone approaches, carrying an energy that the protagonist recognizes. Without hesitation, Zich draws his sword, and we discover that standing in front of him is none other than Nauen himself, incarnated in Snock's body. The protagonist then asks why the boy is like that after being kidnapped. Without an answer, our boy concludes that Snock doesn't seem to be conscious. Trying once more, he asks if the boy has ever heard the name Nauen. Still not responding, the little boy grits his teeth, making sharp rocks rise from the ground right after. After jumping back to save himself, Zich thinks that this is strange, because he doesn't remember if Nauen was always like this. Concluding that no, since the god is known for incarnating into his enemies in a systematic and rational way. Unlike his opponent, who seems to be going insane, Snock, who now has fire hair, realizes that he's about to be attacked, because the protagonist is in the air ready to strike him down while saying that if he doesn't want to get hurt, it's better to start talking and answer the questions. Raising his arm in front of his face, the boy tries to defend himself. A blue light radiates throughout the environment, and we see that the boy managed to block the attack, which hit the ground, sending rocks flying. Without hesitation, Snock counterattacks, launching a red beam of light, forcing Zich to retreat to avoid getting hit. While thinking that a normal human wouldn't have survived his attack, the two stare at each other face to face. Suddenly, more rocks rise from the ground, and the protagonist realizes that Snock's power has increased out of nowhere, which means he is about to awaken as the Tyrant of the Earth. Grabbing his sword again, our boy says that in that case, he will have to end the battle before his opponent gets stronger. To defend himself, the boy builds a stone wall, but Zich manages to pass through it easily. cutting through the last rock as soon as he gets close enough. Suddenly, Snock launches another attack, forcing the protagonist to scream and squint his eyes because of the blinding light. We see that the boy keeps watching him without showing any reaction, when out of nowhere, a sword battle begins between our boy and the same hooded figure from before, who says that the boy should learn to value the lives of others, because if he kills people without a good reason, he might end up in hell. Zix decides that the best thing now is to back off again, to ask if it was the man who did that to Snock. Smiling, the man asks if he didn't do a good job. Answering, the protagonist says that judging by the energy, it looks like the man fused the boy with a mythical beast of the earth, one that he thinks is called Noen. Thinking to himself, the Emmy wonders how the boy knows that and decides to ask out loud. Scratching his neck, Zix says that he can't reveal all his tricks. Annoyed, the man prepares to launch an attack while asking if the boy is sure, because if he doesn't answer, he'll have to get the information by force. We discover that the man actually used the power on himself to transform into a beast. Now being twice the size, he says that he didn't want to show that trick to the boy, but there was no choice. Without thinking twice, Snock charges to attack the man, but the man grabs his hair, asking if the boy thinks he's a threat, which is very unfortunate. Throwing the little boy far away, the man says that now something else needs his attention. Zitch intervenes and asks if the man thinks it's a good idea to throw the boy away like that. Replying, the beast says that the boy must have done a lot to win him over, but now he's in berserker mode, and that he can find him later since the focus is to finish off the protagonist. Also enjoying the quality time they have together, Zitch manages to dodge the blow that hits the ground with full force. Without hesitation, the man quickly attacks again, but this time, our boy counterattacks, blocking the man's fist with his sword. Laughing, his opponent says that attack was weak, and that it won't be enough to defeat him. Out of nowhere, a small explosion happens, removing the beast's arm, who is left in shock. Without wasting time, Zitch attacks again, finishing off his enemy once and for all. Sheathing his sword, the protagonist wonders how far Snock was thrown. Elsewhere, we see Hans running through the forest, looking for where the noise came from that sounded more like an earthquake. Suddenly, he sees the little boy lying on the ground, immediately realizing that it's little Snock. Getting closer, the blonde boy asks him to get up and show that he's okay and breathing. Suddenly, the little boy's eyes open. A while later, we see Hans screaming, desperately asking why the little boy is doing that to him. Trying to run away, the servant can't imagine anything he did to be attacked like that, as memories of when he first met Snock flood his mind. Seeing the boy lifting a huge rock, Hans wonders what kind of training he received, concluding that if he gets hit, he'll be a dead man. Without hesitation, the possessed little boy throws the rock, making the young man realize that he won't be able to dodge in time, then deciding that he'll have to do something else, which is to cut the boulder in half with his sword. Surprisingly, he succeeds and comes out of the attack unharmed. Placing his hand on his chest, Hans reveals that he thought he was going to die at that moment, also affirming in his mind that he will show Snock the power of his training. Suddenly, a noise catches his attention. Turning around, he sees a huge wall rising from the ground, which makes him think that now his end has come. Luckily, something saves him, leaving him confused and not knowing where all that water came from. Meanwhile, Snock is about to be hit by a huge wave, defending himself by creating another stone barrier with his power. Looking up, his eyes widen, because Zitch is approaching in an aerial attack. While thinking that this is the only way to end the boy's rage, Snock begs not to be hit, but the protagonist doesn't listen and places his hand on Snock's forehead, praying that his strike doesn't make things worse. Elsewhere, Snock wakes up, wondering why he's there and what happened. Suddenly, a growl catches his attention. We see that his mole is by his side, but this time emanating the evil energy that was previously inside him. Trying to calm his pet, the boy extends his hand, then asks Noen to listen to him, revealing that his mind was being controlled before and that during that time he had a dream about him, and that he knows his father died because of an earthquake caused by the mole. But he also knows that the mole didn't do it on purpose, because it was simply freed from its prison and by chance, his father was in the way. With tears in his eyes, Snock apologizes, saying that he understands how much it must have hurt when he just walked away, and that if he could go back in time, he would do everything differently. Ready to make a proposal, the little boy extends his hand again, and asks why Noen doesn't come out of there with him to enjoy life. Calmer, the little mole stretches out its tiny paw and grabs the boy's finger, showing that it agrees to be on good terms with him again. Day breaks, and we see people gathered where the battles happened. Guards block the entrance to the mine, preventing residents from entering or getting close, because inside, other people are conducting a thorough investigation. In a house a bit farther from there, Zitch asks if Hans did what he asked, and replying, Hans says yes, and that he told everyone he didn't know anything, and that he climbed the mountain because he heard a noise. Worried, the boy asks if the protagonist is sure the knights won't find out that the incident was their fault. Our boy then affirms that since they scattered the corpses around the mine, no one will ever suspect anything. Most importantly of all, is the fact that no one will ever suspect that a boy like Snock was involved. Zitch then turns to the little boy and says that since he and Noen made a pact, everything will be fine, especially since the mana abilities of the two are similar. Standing up, the protagonist asks what the boy will do from that moment on. Answering, Snock says he's still thinking after all, Nawan really killed his father and he can't ignore that. Understanding the situation, our boy asks if the kid is hesitating to forgive the mole because it didn't suffer any consequences, then suggesting that he find a way to make it pay, leaving the boy confused. Without explaining much, Zich says that the boy really wanted to be an adventurer, and that's why he was even tricked, so he thinks he can help him with that part, as a form of doing a good deed. Birds start singing desperately as they notice a certain movement, suddenly flying far away from that whole situation. The warrior looks extremely tired but still holds his weapon. With a terrifying scream, he charges forward with all his strength. His opponent raises a barrier between the two as a form of protection. But the young man is so angry that with one strike, he manages to destroy the stone. At that moment, the boy and his pet are left shocked. Annoyed, the young man asks if the boy is okay. Suddenly, someone approaches asking what the two of them are doing. For him, both were distracted during the battle. Therefore, the imposing man declares that they will fight for one more hour. Exhausted, the boys can't believe they have to go through all of that again. Meanwhile, the moon rises in the sky, bringing the night with it. A campfire is made on the ground and meats are being roasted. Sitting down, they enjoy the food eagerly. The protagonist's expression shows that he was just watching them without saying anything. One of the boys exaggerates about the taste of the food being a bit dramatic. With a curious expression, he asks about their next destination while holding a piece of meat. The protagonist informs them that they should head to Osprin. Confused, the boy next to him seems not to know the place. Before the regression, there were 3 demons that served, and one of them was from Osprin. At that moment, the warrior reflects on the demon's location. With a smile on his face, it shows that he was eager to find out. Meanwhile, his companions look at him, frightened. The master's expression seemed to have transformed into something completely terrifying. The next day, the 3 of them started their journey very early. Suddenly, the man noticed dark smoke coming from the castle. The boys also noticed a strange smell, nothing related to food. Upon receiving the information that the smell came from burning bodies, they were completely shocked. Worried, the protagonist reflected on whether it was just a fire or an invasion. Shortly after, they hear a voice coming from inside the forest. Wielding their spears, the knights demanded that the strangers identify themselves immediately. Nervous, the boys couldn't even say their names, but the leader quickly informed them that they were just travelers, and that they were passing through the area looking for a safe place to stay for the night. The guards discussed the possibility that they came through the mountains and might be sick. Meanwhile, the master tried to listen to what they were discussing. In the end, the guard asks the travelers to accompany them. The village was simple and surrounded by armed security on all sides. The 3 walked together, observing the whole place carefully. Shortly after, they arrived at the young master's cabin and were announced as a suspicious group. Losing their balance, the boys were thrown into the room. Calmly, the guard explained that they were found in the forest and claimed to be travelers. Moreover, they didn't believe that these people were inhabitants of the village. The protagonist's expression completely changed when he saw the young master. With a smile on his face, he introduced himself as Joachim Drakel, commander of the task force sent to the village. Joachim Drakel was one of the 4 guys who traveled the world with the warrior. At that moment, he realized that the feeling of sharing battles was still very recent. Besides that, they used to drink together to celebrate victories. With respect, the protagonist bows and introduces himself as Zeke. His companions were Hans, Snock, and the little one on his shoulder was Noan. Zeke informs them that he came from Seoul to train his subordinates in the mountains. Reflecting on the information received, both exchange intrigued glances. Joachim chooses to believe the strangers, leaving the guard desperate for believing in the possibility that they were fugitives from the village. But the young master asks him to calm down about his rushed decision. According to his plans, he had no intention of letting the travelers leave that place. The warrior's thoughts questioned that man's charisma. Now that they were in the village, they should stay with them for a while, because in that place there was an infectious disease spreading everywhere. But the protagonist was already fully aware of all that information due to some clues. The men were sent to the town trying to prevent the disease from spreading even more. Since Zeke and his subordinates had contact with them, they could have been infected and should leave the village. Calmly, the young warrior reflected on the seriousness of an infectious disease, assuming it would generate a discussion. Smiling, he decides to offer some kind of help to Master Joachim Drakel. One of the boys looks surprised while the other seems happy. Suddenly, a guard rushes into the cabin in desperation. With nervousness in his voice, he reveals that there was an infected person with new symptoms. Without wasting time, the men run to observe what the real situation was. Upon arriving at the place, the shock in Joachim's eyes becomes evident. Lying on the ground, one of his warriors seems to be suffering uncontrollably. The order was to record the person's symptoms and follow the protocol. From a distance, the protagonist made observations, noticing that the experienced response came from someone who used to be his subordinate. Touching his head lightly, Joachim seems a little dizzy and pale. While sweat drips down his face, he informs them that he has a bit of a fear of blood. Confused, the protagonist seems not to believe that revelation. Laughing to try to control the panic, he informs them that he suffers from hemophobia. Before Zeke's regression, that man was known as the vampire. Confused, he couldn't believe that the same person who had the ability to control blood could have a fear of it. The life of the vampire was indeed something very different from his present. Finally, Zeke reflects on how that revelation seems absurd, questioning the situation in a comedic way. Homophobia caused major problems for the young master, but apparently he didn't want to go into more detail about the subject. Draco was always very reserved, and even before the protagonist's regression, he had only revealed the place he came from. With sincerity in his voice, the warrior informs that Johan would be able to overcome the difficulties. In the end, he would become so used to it that one day he could even take a bloodbath as a hobby. After that, since they could leave the village, they helped Johan and his soldiers. They did everything possible to ensure the disease was completely eliminated. However, the results were still not satisfactory. Therefore, the best decision was to set fire to the entire village and destroy it completely. The flames spread throughout the region while they watched in sadness. Hans reflects on the people they lost along the way. Meanwhile, what remains for Draco is to accept the sad ending. Zeke realizes that the young master seemed very upset. The death of so many people and the complete destruction of the village were the cause of his suffering. At that moment, the protagonist realizes that this was not a common feeling for the Johan of the past. In the end, the leader shows himself to be extremely grateful for all of Zeke's help. The young man's response indicates that the reason for his travels was to perform good deeds. Shortly after, the master also states that he was very grateful for the help from Hans and Snock. With a smile on his face, he says that they were all very noble. The situation was reported to the castle, and now they had to wait for orders to return. Johan Draco extends the invitation to his new friends, and without thinking twice, Zeke responds for everyone, saying that they couldn't refuse. Suddenly, someone starts calling for his lord. In his hands, the boy carried a message from the castle. The man opens the scroll and looks shocked by what he has just read. Meanwhile, the protagonist tries to understand the reason for all the attention on his face. Soon after, Johan informs them that they should prepare to leave. But to everyone's surprise, the destination would not be Osprin. They were heading to a different village affected by the disease. His subordinates are extremely frightened upon hearing that revelation. Zeke realizes that the master was being sent to another contaminated place despite being part of a noble family. The sun shone above a building surrounded by windows. Angrily, a hand slams against the armchair, causing a loud bang. Sitting on the throne, the man reflects on the information that the disease was highly contagious, capable of wiping out an entire village. That's why he couldn't understand why Joachim Draco was still alive. Bowing his torso, the servant apologizes, assuming that the boy must be a very lucky person. The man grows increasingly irritated and grabs a vase beside him. He simply couldn't accept that the young master wasn't eliminated by the disease. His anger is so great that he throws the object against the wall. Calmly, the servant watches the madness taking over his entire body. Now that man expected a different plan capable of killing Joachim Draco once and for all. Meanwhile, the soldiers decided to build a large bonfire. Hans noticed that all the bodies would be burned in that place. With a crater in the ground, the fire spread and took over the whole. In the end, that entire village was also wiped out by the disease. And once again, they had no orders to return to the castle. Suddenly, Zeke hears a strange noise coming from the middle of the forest. Hans looks worried and questions the leader. Shortly after, he decides to grab his sword to face any kind of threat. Determined, he demands that the hidden people show themselves as quickly as possible. 5 hooded creatures emerge from the woods and reveal themselves. They quickly draw their weapons hidden in their garments, and without a word, they all launch them toward the protagonist. Using all of his skills, he manages to dodge the attack with his powerful sword. His subordinates seem impressed by what was happening. Those were the Black Hoods, skilled and determined warriors. Zeke reflects that they seem similar to the previous ones. Realizing that a fight was coming, he calls for Hans and Snock. The order given to the boys was to attack 2 of those hooded figures, 1 each. After that explanation, Zeke runs into the fight, leaving the boys completely in shock. The leader's goal was to capture one of them and get as much information as possible. With a leap, he tries to approach his target, but notices something unusual. A large explosion happens in the middle of the forest, preventing his attack. At that moment, he realizes it was the same artifact used by the warrior from Seoul. Additionally, it was apparently the same fighting method as well. Finally, he starts questioning why those guys were all in the same place. The battle intensifies, and he continues with his reflective thoughts. Their goal in Seoul was to turn Noam into a demon. This time, it could be something similar to the last one. Therefore, the Black Hoods were probably after Joachim Draco, who would one day become his companion. He thinks that the fact Johan would become a demonic human might be related to it. On top of that, it was exactly around that time that demonic humans started to appear in the world. It was enough for people to start calling that period the era of demonic humans. Deep down, he considered the possibility that those guys had created all the demonic humans. However, he remembers that some of them transformed naturally, like himself. Suddenly, he becomes intrigued by a possibility that crossed his mind. The protagonist believes that his transformation into the Demon King could be part of someone's plan. After leaving the Count's residence, he realizes that all the circumstances pushed him toward that destiny. From the beginning, all the events forced him to become a demonic human. At the time, he used to believe that all of it was just bad luck and the chaos of the world. Meanwhile, his enemy prepared a flame spell to launch against him. Angrily, he starts reflecting on the possibility of having been used as some kind of puppet. Suddenly, he jumps into the air and heads toward his opponent. Even though it was an interesting situation, none of it could be forgiven. The moonlight illuminated the entire camp. Lying in their beds, Hans, Snock, and Naum slept in a deep sleep. Still awake, Zeke thought about how he wasn't able to capture any of those warriors. In the end, they all ended up killing themselves. Looking at the fire, he reflects on the possibility of Johan becoming a demonic human. At that moment, he could be considered a kind of obstacle to the plans of the Black Hoods. Alone, he reflects on how the young master would be if he were transformed. In the end, he concludes that it would be better for him to remain an ordinary human. Suddenly, Johan appears near the fire, noticing that Zeke was still awake. The night falls while the two sit watching the fire. The protagonist's thoughts lead him to reflect on the reasons why Johan would become a demonic human. It must be something irresistible for someone with hemophobia to use a blood domination ability. Looking at his companion's face, he notices that he seemed distant. Drackle informs him that he was thinking about his father. In the middle of the year, his father had lost consciousness and became completely unresponsive. That's why the young master was reflecting on whether he should have done some things differently. At that moment, the warrior realizes why Johan possessed so much power in his hands. Being the eldest, that position was something natural. Even so, Zeke seemed suspicious and observed him carefully. Suddenly, a soldier bursts into the camp completely desperate. Catching his breath, he informs them that they had received the order to return to the castle. Confused, Johan Drackle seems unable to believe his words. Meanwhile, the night had already completely surrounded the building. Calm footsteps could be heard as people advanced through the area. Johan Drackle presents himself to his brother, showing that he was fine. With extreme falseness in his gaze, the noble welcomes him back home. Carefully, the warrior observes the differences between the two brothers. The only thing they had in common was their sickly appearance, one with mental issues and the other with pale skin. Suddenly, Zeke starts observing the old butler next to him. Drackle informs his brother that the disease has spread through Osprin. Regretfully, the man blames the boy, saying that he wasn't careful enough to control the plague. The soldiers seem unable to believe they were being blamed for everything. Giving his brother another chance, he decides to send him to Osprin with the goal of containing the disease again. This time, he could only return when the disease was completely eradicated. Moreover, the man says that he could get sick too, feeling nauseous just thinking about it. The young master seems to have no words to respond to his brother and decides to accept the mission. In Osprin, they tried to assess the situation cautiously. The area where the infected resided was under strict quarantine. So far, the deaths totaled 60 people. Additionally, the doctor reported that the infectious disease could be Igram. The protagonist realizes that in each city, there was a different disease. At that moment, he starts reflecting on who could be controlling the entire situation. Fest, the demonic human, was capable of paralyzing an entire world out of fear of a disease. However, the creature wasn't the type that spread such a common disease like that. With determination, he seems to reflect on a possible scheme. If Fest was hiding somewhere in the city, the warrior had to make him reveal himself. With a lower number of deaths, maybe they would have some chance. Despite their hopes, the doctors still hadn't discovered a possible treatment. Apparently, it was very difficult to create something capable of treating the disease even with intense efforts. Suddenly, Zeke informs the young master that he might be able to create a cure for Igram. Shortly after, they decide to visit the sick. Zeke was holding a potion in his hands that could treat the disease. Before his regression, when infectious diseases were spreading around the world, students and scientists created a cure for Igram. In the past, Zeke Moore learned how to make it due to Johan's interest in diseases. Holding the liquid in his hands, he licks one of the patients. Calmly, he pours a little of the potion into his mouth. Meanwhile, everyone seemed apprehensive about the next steps. Shortly after, the man regains consciousness and starts begging for some water. Realizing that the treatment had worked, Zeke informs them that he would write the formula down for the doctors. Jofheim asks if the man was really willing to teach the cure since he could make a lot of money with it. However, he replies that he didn't care about wealth and only wanted to bring kindness to the world. Suddenly, Drackle starts approaching Zeke. The young master shows all his gratitude by hugging the protagonist warmly. With a smile on his face, he states that meeting him was the best thing that ever happened. Meanwhile, the hero didn't seem to appreciate that hug very much. The formula is distributed to all the sick, who quickly begin to heal. Zeke shows the doctors the best way to make that recipe. Now that he had created the treatment for Igram, Fest's appearance was only a matter of time. Suddenly, a voice starts desperately looking for Zeke. The butler arrives at the scene surrounded by soldiers. Confused, the protagonist doesn't seem to understand the reason for all that. Curiously, the butler asks where he had learned the cure for the disease. At that moment, the hero remembers the imposing figure who was always by Joheim's brother's side. Thinking a bit more, he makes a guess that the old man could be Fest. Shortly after, the two are sitting around a table. Again, the man questions where the hero had learned the treatment for Igram. However, he had already answered that he learned everything from a book. But the butler didn't seem convinced and didn't like the boy's attitude. Slamming the table, he stands up, making himself more imposing. Zeke is unable to inform the name of the book that gave him that information. Additionally, he says that in the pages he read, he only found the treatment for one disease, Igram. The old man's gaze reflected all of his anger. appearing more and more impatient. Suddenly, Draco enters the room, noticing all the man's harassment. Curious, he asks what the butler was trying to do with his companion. Angrily, he points out how the old man was being rude to the savior of Osprey. Unable to get the answers he wanted, the butler turns his back and leaves. Joheim apologizes for the man's behavior, saying he crossed the line. After remembering the figure present at the castle, he asks who that man was. In his memories, he was always by the side of the young master's brother. Draco informs him that this was Bethnal Salome, the family's butler. Originally, he was the captain of the knights but had to retire after an injury, becoming the family butler. His concern could be justified by the fact that Zeke's cure could put him on a pedestal higher than the brothers. Salome was supporting Joheim's brother to become the successor. Due to the interference, the hero was unable to discover whether Salome's true identity was Fest, the demon. Changing the subject, the leader says he heard that Zeke didn't have the necessary people to create more medicine. Therefore, Draco was willing to introduce someone who would like to help. After being called, a lady appears in the tent. Greta Vargat, owner of the Vargat Company, seemed delighted to meet the young man. Despite being beautiful, Zeke couldn't understand her widow's clothes. Ms. Vargat had a great interest in infectious diseases, constantly sponsoring research. Curiously, she asks if she could learn the cure formula. Realizing the woman's knowledge, Zeke informs her that he would have to learn much more from her than the other way around. The two move to another area where soldiers were carrying heavy crates. The hero begins presenting the main information about Agram to the lady. The first thing to do would be to shut off the water sources and make medicine. His subordinates observe the relationship between the two from afar, noticing some compliments. Hans comments that anyone could think the two were dating, and Snock agrees. The sunset approaches, transforming the entire atmosphere. An herb is shown, claiming to be good for those facing a cold. Greta Vargat is delighted with all the knowledge shared by the protagonist. Even so, she believed that she still had much more to learn from him. The lady informs that her interest in medicinal herbs arose due to her family. However, her family did not conduct research related to diseases. Worried, the woman takes some time to gather enough courage to offer a proposal. Vargat would like the hero to accompany her to be introduced to her family. Night falls over the surroundings, leaving everything dark around the castle. With light steps, a man opens a door. At that moment, the figure was inside the noble's chambers. A potion is poured into the mouth of the unconscious man, Joheim's father. Suddenly, his expression starts to change and he grabs the bedsheets. Holding the potion in his hands, Bethnal Salome states that this was merely the sovereign's karma. Zeke seems confused as he realizes that the two were standing in front of graves in the cemetery. Greta reveals that all members of her family died due to a devastating infectious disease, and the reason she started studying that subject was to prevent other people from losing their families like she did. Due to a vow, she began wearing mourning clothes. The woman would stop wearing those clothes only when all infections were completely eradicated from the world. That is why she decided to show the protagonist the graves of her husband and son. Realizing that she had said enough, she decided it was time for them to return. Together, the two would completely eradicate Agram from the face of the earth. Turning her back, the woman starts walking away from the cemetery. However, the hero seems suspicious of her identity, assuming that she could also be Fest. The subordinates seem confused about something. Zeke realizes that he is being closely watched. Since he was very busy, he asked the boys to stop wasting time and get straight to the point. To his surprise, it is Hans who questions him about his possible relationship with Miss Vargat. The soldiers were spreading some rumors that the two were a couple. However, the protagonist seems neither to confirm nor deny the information. Finally, Hans states that his boss was a man after all, instead of some kind of Buddha. Hearing those words, the master throws a rock at the boy's head. Zeke seems confused by the speculations about him and Greta Vargat, since the two hadn't done anything romantic. Besides, she had appeared at the same moment when he created the treatment for Igram and knew a lot about diseases. That's why he still considered the possibility that she was Fest, making her even more suspicious than Salome. However, she still didn't seem to act like a demon, so she needed to be observed for a little longer. The protagonist reflects that he should have asked Gren Zenhart, as he was the only one who knew Fest's identity after killing him. While lost in his thoughts, a voice starts calling him. The information revealed that the Lord's people had taken Miss Vargat. Joheim informs him that they claimed it was to check the condition of the Lord, but he preferred to verify it personally. At that moment, the hero reflects on the key person for disease treatment being recruited. His thoughts reveal that Salome might be Fest and is inside the castle. Determined, he offers to accompany the young master on the journey, but Draco asks him to stay in Ostrin. Besides being a family issue, there was no one qualified enough to take care of so many patients in the city. With determination, the leader states that he was willing to bring Greta Vargat back safely. Respecting his decision, the hero says he would wait for him anxiously. The two shake hands, sealing the agreement. In a room, the butler reads a paper filled with long writings. Suddenly, a soldier appears to inform him that young Master Bjorn would like to see the butler Salome. With a smile on his face, he says it would not be possible to accompany the noble that night. A few days later, someone presents Lord Zeke with the last remaining building. They were searching for the villagers inside that haunted place. Gathering courage, the leader and his subordinates observed that horrible situation. The news was not good since a disease with the same symptoms was spreading in a nearby region. Since he possessed medical knowledge, he was the most suitable person to go there and see with his own eyes. Accepting the instructions, the warrior was ready for his departure. However, he still hadn't received any confirmation that Joheim had arrived at the castle. Quickly, the soldier responds that the master was already well accommodated in the castle and urges the young man to check the village. Opening the door, the protagonist reflects on how many days had passed since Drakel's departure. At that moment, he believed that some harm could be done to the master if he didn't obey the orders. The large doors open, and everyone looks on with curiosity. Suddenly, the boys change their expressions after noticing something strange. People were lying on the ground with sheets covering their heads. Shortly after, a mysterious voice questions who the intruder was. Holding a bucket in his hands, the man warns that their entry was not permitted. Zeke informs him that they came from Osprey to inspect the disease. With a smile on his face, the man assumes they were doctors and apologizes. Realizing that it was not the right place to discuss, he offers a quieter room. Hans and Snock seem to agree to follow the man. While walking, the hero states that he has understood the situation. Shortly after, he grips his weapon tightly, leaving the stranger frightened. He points his sword at the mysterious man. Suddenly, his expression transforms into something evil. The man holds a weapon and starts showing some movements. Without wasting time, he charges forward, running towards his opponent. But Zeke is more skilled and manages to land a precise strike. With the sword in his body, the threat falls to the ground, completely eliminated. Confused, Snock seems unable to understand what just happened. Before explaining the situation, the hero retrieves his sword. Suddenly, a large explosion occurs, sending debris in all directions. Through the smoke, Bethanel Salam appears, showing that he was ready for battle. Despite everything, Zeke was not naive enough to fall into a stupid trap. The three take their positions, ready to face a new battle. According to Zeke's order, Hans and Snock would fight together. Despite being an arrogant boy, Salam considers the young man quite clever. The old man orders his men to kill everyone. Together, the three begin to defeat all the soldiers coming at them. At that moment, the protagonist reflects on the situation, noticing that those were villagers. Considering the appearance of those people and their movements, they were probably all infected. In the end, all those civilians were being used as shields. The butler's behavior was very similar to Fest. Calling his subordinates, Zeke asked them to keep alive anyone who wasn't a killer. Even so, Snock seems confused by the order. When he turns around, he witnesses a fight scene. Hans uses all his brutality to twist one of the men's arms. But in reality, they were supposed to knock them out. The soldiers couldn't kill civilians, but also didn't have enough time to be gentle. Meanwhile, the attacks continued, showing that the situation was becoming more intense. At that point, the old man should have realized he was at a disadvantage. Zeke and his subordinates do everything to take the men down. Realizing he was losing, Salam desperately screams for Krobet. Quickly, the giant enters the room holding a powerful weapon in his hands. The boys are stunned by the creature standing in front of them. With no time for discussions, Krobet lets out a roar, showing he was ready for battle. Although he had never seen Fest, Zeke remembered that monster perfectly. It was one of Fest's subordinates. At that point, he believed that Salam had some involvement with Fest. And despite his skills, he was sure that Krobet was going to be a real pain. Everything seems calm until a door is smashed in half. The fight between Krobet and Zeke keeps intensifying more and more. Those kinds of creatures were the most annoying to fight due to their extreme strength. Smiling, Salam seems to enjoy the monster's combat power. However, Zeke possessed an extraordinary skill with his sword and tried to approach with a strike. Suddenly, the monster grabs his weapon and tries to land a blow on the protagonist, but he manages to dodge. Gaining momentum, he grips his weapon and flies towards the monster. Even managing to hit it, he realizes that its skin was ridiculously tough. On the other side, the boys fought bravely to survive. At that moment, the hero realized that he would need to give more of himself. Although he knew he had more mana, he was sure it wasn't enough to defeat that thing. In this case, he decided to use the expansion sense with the remaining mana. The energy vibrated in his sword and flowed through the environment. To achieve the perfect strike, he had to wait for the ideal opening. Krobet kept advancing with his intense blows, leaving no time to rest. When he noticed that his enemy was kneeling on the ground, Zeke raised his weapon high. At that moment, Zeke realized he was facing the perfect opportunity. With his sharp sword, he was able to strike his enemy right in the stomach. The monster began to feel intense pain running through its body. The mana poured from his sword, activating several spells. Salam didn't like that situation one bit and became increasingly enraged. Suddenly, the situation became more and more desperate, with a wave of mana forming in the area. The vortex was pulling everything in its path, including the butler. Krobet realized there was no escape anymore and that this was his end. His body explodes as it is engulfed by a powerful energy. Not knowing what to do, Salam watches that scene in complete desperation. Even knowing he wasn't as strong as before, Zeke was capable of causing tremendous destruction. Shortly after, the protagonist approaches the man, questioning whether he was the one behind the infectious diseases. The weapons used by the Black Hoods were the same as those used by the guys who tried to kidnap Snock and Soul. The villain, with an arrogant smile, reveals that he has no intention of making deals with the protagonist, only of destroying him. Confused, the hero seems unable to understand the man's goals. Salam, enraged and already out of control, promises to take revenge for ruining his plans against the Drackle family. Frightened, the boys watch the entire discussion. Suddenly, the butler pulls a vial from his suit, revealing his true intentions. Forcefully, he smashes the container on the ground, determined to proceed with his plans. Hans and Snot hold their breath, wondering if it's something poisonous. However, the protagonist informs them that it's just a smoke bomb. Now everyone must go after the old man who is trying to flee as quickly as possible. The next step would be to invade the castle to help Johan. Chained in a prison, the young master couldn't escape from that place. They had to head to the Lord's castle as quickly as possible. Zeke knew that Johan could be in danger at that very second. Suddenly, he starts looking at one of the fallen civilians beside him. A red stain can be seen behind the man's ear. Meanwhile, in the castle dungeons, Johan had been locked in prison by his own brother Bjorn, who had taken over the castle. Even in that situation, he still found time to think about Miss Varga, hoping she was safe. Suddenly, a voice starts talking to him. Drackle couldn't believe that person was capable of invading a place where only sinners were imprisoned. With a smile on his face, the man says he is there to help him. He presents a fire orb called Bloody Vessel and asks Johan to place it inside his body. With that artifact, he would be able to obtain tremendous powers. He could defeat the brother who desired his death along with all his followers. The man is shocked to hear the refusal in the master's voice. Suspicious, he wasn't willing to consume something offered by a stranger. Irritated, the hooded man realizes that his plans didn't go as expected, and maybe the reason was that bastard who showed up with the cure for Igram. However, he decides to try another approach, saying that he would reveal the whole truth. There was a man who manipulated infectious diseases at his will. Furthermore, his brother and that man were conspiring together solely for the purpose of killing the master. At that moment, Drackle starts paying more attention to the man's words. Bjorn destroyed all nearby villages with infectious diseases just to kill him and spread Igram, the weakest one in Ostrin. Despite all attempts, Johan remained alive, and for that, he was imprisoned. Noticing the noble's growing anger, the man explains that he had been on Bjorn's side temporarily. But he didn't want his brother to become the new count because he would turn Ostrin into a living hell. That's why the boy should set his anxiety aside and take the chance to save the world. Once again, the hooded man offers the chance to acquire tremendous power. If he wanted to protect the people, he should absorb that bloody vessel. Suddenly, the protagonist appears inside the prison. Curiously, he asks if that item was for sale. Quickly, the man hides the powerful item inside his sleeve. Approaching, Zeke demands an explanation about the item in his hands. Even with the man's refusal, he insists, saying that he should be more understanding with someone who had ambushed him several times. But the man refuses again, saying that the protagonist didn't mean to know. In the middle of the prison, the two exchange intense glances. The protagonist states that there was no fun in negotiating with the guy. Since he saw one of his associates back in Seoul, he had formed a theory that all of them were part of an organization created to produce demonic humans. At that moment, he assumes that the man's plan was to turn Joe Hyam into one of his creatures. Hearing those words, the man starts getting more and more irritated. There was no other choice but to endure until reinforcements arrived. Besides, it would be difficult to get any relevant information from that man since he barely spoke. Suddenly, they began hearing noises coming from outside the prison. Apparently, Bjorn's reinforcements had arrived at the location. However, it was Hans and some soldiers who were ready to help the master. The hooded man becomes even angrier upon discovering that they had taken over the entire area. Zeke starts provoking the man, saying that his expression looked a little different. Smiling, he asks if that short period of hope was good. Realizing he was at a disadvantage, the man turned his back and started to flee. Zeke shouts for Snuck, who begins using his powers. Suddenly, stones fall from the ceiling, shaking the entire structure of the prison. Nervous, the man realizes he was completely ruined. Shortly after, a huge explosion sends debris flying in all directions. As the smoke dissipates into the air, the soldiers observe the situation. One of them shouts for the young master upon noticing a threat coming their way. From the ground, a giant stone-shaped hand emerges. But inside it, Johan is safe and sound, far from any danger. Zeke congratulates Snock on his incredible work. Despite everything, the noble was doing very well and without injuries. The next step was to get rid of his brother for starting that whole war. However, Zeke seems suspicious about certain things. Shortly after, they walk calmly through the corridors. The young master guides his soldiers toward Bjorn's chambers. However, Zeke noticed that the way he communicated with the soldiers was very different from the Drackle of his past life. If it weren't for his weak body, Johan would have taken the position of successor a long time ago. Suddenly, everyone stops walking as they notice the presence of the butler. Irritated, Johan calls out to Salam, seeming not to understand what was in front of his eyes. A short time later, he sees Bjorn's body lying on the ground. Seeing the master in front of him, the villain assumes his minion failed the mission. Somehow, the young man managed to survive and help Johan once again. Determined, the master questions whether Salam was the one behind all those tragedies. With a smile on his face, the butler seems impressed by the late discovery. On top of that, he was the one responsible for leaving the Lord in that condition, with the goal of bringing judgment to the Drackle family. Confused, the master seems not to understand those motivations. Irritated, he asks what happened to Miss Vargat. However, Zeke interrupts, saying that he was not the real culprit. The one responsible for spreading all those diseases was Fest. Meanwhile, everyone pays attention as they hear a woman's footsteps approaching. With a smile on her face, Greta Vargat seems impressed to see Zeke alive. At that moment, everyone starts putting the pieces on the board together. In the end, the one responsible for spreading an infectious disease was Miss Vargat. On top of everything, she also received assistance from Solam during the entire process. Johayam can't believe it and questions the woman's motivation. Increasingly enraged, the butler orders silence while holding his sword. Angrily, he asks whether Drackle knew about the atrocities committed by his father. Shortly after, the butler begins to remember what happened a decade ago. When a disease was circulating in Osprin, his father placed everyone he could to try to stop the spread. It worked to a certain extent, but all the methods came back to him in the form of debt. Then his father decided to spread the infectious disease again in the areas where people he owed money lived. Johayam seems shocked by the Lord's actions and doubts the butler's words. The people who trusted his father and lent him money were taken by the disease. The owner of the Varvat company and also Solem's only friend was taken by the same situation. That's why the man decided to judge the entire Drackle family in search of revenge with the sword of his deceased friend. However, Zeke states that such revenge was terrible since he was attacking innocent civilians. But the man considered them all a bunch of ignorant fools who worshipped the Drackle family until the last second. In his eyes, Johayam was no better than the Lord. Gripping his sword tightly, he points it at his enemies. Noticing Zeke's interference, he grows increasingly furious and charges toward the young man. Johayam seems worried about his friend, but he was already prepared to defend himself. Suddenly, something unexpected happens before their eyes. Vargat was behind the butler, delivering a powerful attack to his body. Surprised, he seems unable to believe that kind of betrayal. As the man collapses in front of her, the woman states that he was terribly mistaken. In the end, if the goal was not revenge, in reality, Greta Vargat wanted as many people as possible to get sick. Zeke asks if there was any reason beyond revenge. Realizing that Salam was dead, she drops his body to the ground. Vargat says that she discovered the reason after her entire family died due to the disease. Her husband and son were fine until the day before, but suddenly they became ill with high fevers and began vomiting blood. Even the doctors refused to treat them for fear of being infected, and she had to take care of them alone. Hours and days passed, and she watched everything as their faces slowly lost life. Suddenly, she was struck by an unusual realization. To her, the faces of people dying from diseases were beautiful, and she was grateful to Count Drackle, who helped her discover the beauty in that. Irritated, the soldier could no longer listen to anything coming from the woman's mouth. Desperate, he waited for the attack order from the young master to kill the one responsible for the death of his companions. Even so, the woman did not seem frightened. Greta Vargat had a peculiar reason for staying close to all of them. The infectious disease did not affect only a select group in Osprin. Johayam realizes that the woman had other hostages, and she was happy to be talking to intelligent people. Curious, the young master decides to find out who she was talking about. His expression changes completely as he is about to reveal something shocking. Everyone is shocked to hear that she was capable of infecting the entire population of Osprin. Johayam could not believe that Vargat had infected all the people. The situation was becoming increasingly concerning for them. Suddenly, she decides to change the subject of the conversation. But Zeke shows that he was ready to end the subject right then. With a smile on her face, Vargat realizes how easy the boy was to manipulate. The protagonist states that he believed every word she said. At that moment, Vargat asks if he was saying that he would sacrifice all the people of Osprin just to defeat her. If it came to choosing between the two, Zeke was willing to kill that woman right there. Hans becomes desperate, believing that his leader should choose the other option, seeking to be increasingly kind. But he shows that he wouldn't change his mind so easily, wanting to finish the woman in front of him. The warrior seemed desperate upon realizing that all the inhabitants of Osprin were going to die. His face becomes completely shocked upon hearing that it was a necessary sacrifice. Knowing that the boy wanted to become a hero, like those in the stories, Zeke teaches that choices can be painful. If they let the woman escape to the mountains, she would be able to spread more infectious diseases. In the end, the number of victims would be much higher than the entire population of Osprin. Zeke was just trying to be kind and not think about which act was better than the other. With his sword pointed at the woman, he waits for the first move. At that moment, Vargat realizes that the two were about to start a powerful fight. With a smile on his face, the protagonist was eager for that moment. Suddenly, Johayam grabs his arm, warning that they could not sacrifice everyone in Osprin. Calmly, the hero states that all the people would be fine. However, he knew that he had no choice between the people of Osprin and Lady Vargat. Increasingly desperate, Johayam starts trying to understand his comrade's words. Greta Vargat is shocked to hear the revelation that all the people in the city had already been treated. With a smile on his face, Zeke questions the brief moment of sweet hope before the truth came to light. Confused, Vargat seems unable to believe how that was possible and assumes the young man was lying. Zeke informs that the people infected with the disease she created developed a red spot behind the ear. Therefore, he assumed that the name of the disease was Galderm. After seeing the manipulated people in the village of Osprin, he put the facts together. And on the way to the castle, he began to be sure of everything. During his journey, he bumped into a young man. Curious, he began observing him and drawing his conclusions. The people of Osprey also had the same red spot behind the ear. Thus, he decided to give them the treatment before reaching the castle. Vargat still cannot understand how he was able to do all of that alone. The entrails of a Vioslon were necessary to create the cure, and because they were rare, it would be impossible to make enough for the citizens. Confused, the protagonist states that he had no knowledge about Vioslons, so he decided to use Hulkum, the purple herb that grows everywhere alongside the highways. In the end, it wasn't difficult to treat all the citizens of Osprey, since making the cure was quite easy. Perplexed, Greta seems unable to believe that the disease she created could be cured by a plant that grows along the highways. With the purpose of provoking her, he states that the woman had very few skills. Noticing the boy's arrogance, her expression becomes increasingly angry. Changing the subject, she decides to talk about Zeke's supposed treatment. She still couldn't understand how he was able to give the cure to all the citizens in just half a day. However, he informs that Greta herself shared the information with him. The medicine was made in liquid form and its taste was almost imperceptible. At that moment, the woman remembers when she told him that the Igram disease had spread through the water. That's why the protagonist decided to put the cure in the water pipes. Zeke had told only a few people about the disease she had spread. Before going to the Lord's castle, he made sure that the people who had taken the medicine no longer had the red spot. After treating the people, they put the medicine into the pipelines. Despite his efforts, he couldn't guarantee that every person in Osprey had been cured. However, he would be glad to be able to defeat the woman. Vargat didn't think that boy would be a disturbance to her plans. Calmly, she pulls a vial from her dress. Even though she didn't want to, she saw no choice but to use that potion. The glass is broken and the liquid runs through her hands. Zeke watches the woman's transformation closely. Suddenly, her face is completely different and her eyes have changed color. Greta Vargat was in fact a powerful witch with incredible abilities. Using her powers, she tries to intimidate each of her opponents. Joheim orders his men to capture the witch as quickly as possible. But the woman is extremely powerful and uses her spells to counter any attack coming her way. Quickly, she manages to hit one of the soldiers. Kneeling on the ground, he touches his face as he feels something different. Red spots would soon cover his face, and then he would start vomiting blood. Zeke realizes that anyone who touched the witch would be infected by her blood. Desperate, the protagonist starts ordering the evacuation of the soldiers and everyone in the castle. Joheim is lost in her thoughts, remembering her father and brother. With determination, she orders the evacuation and also warns the knights not to come into contact with the witch's blood. Meanwhile, the rest would be left in Zeke's hands. Vargat prepared for the final battle and seemed curious to fight the young man. While being hit by spells, he thinks that a mage would be ideal for that kind of fight. On second thought, the witch reflects that despite his personality, he was a good escort. As a provocation, she says she would return the favor by making everything more fun for him. The hero realizes that the woman was ready to do any kind of thing. Holding his sword, he reveals his precious skills. If Vargat's blood touched him, he would immediately be infected with the unidentified disease. If he caused wounds on the woman's skin, the splashes could come in his direction. That's why she became such an annoying enemy to deal with. With determination, he decides to aim for the parts that hadn't fully regenerated yet. With a jump, he gets the witch's arm, causing a kind of burn. Shortly after, the woman's limb falls to the ground. With a smile on his face, the protagonist seems confident about the situation he created. Confused, Vargat doesn't understand why she isn't regenerating. But even so, she wouldn't lose the battle and was willing to attack Zeke with her powers. Greta starts running from her opponent since she didn't want to die in a place like that. Without wasting time, the warrior goes after the witch, willing to give everything he's got. He couldn't let the woman leave the Lord's territory. The demon of the past, Zeke Moore, would roll in his grave if he saw how his current version was trying to protect the citizens. Desperate, the witch keeps running as fast as she can. But Zeke doesn't give up the chase for even a second. Suddenly, she stops in the middle of the forest, completely exhausted. At that moment, she realizes she's cornered and doesn't know how to proceed. Behind her, the warrior is already preparing for his next sword strike. Realizing there was no escape, Vargat decides to try negotiating. But the hero wouldn't waste his words on that cruel person and quickly drove his sword into her. The witch's body starts to catch fire, and he watches closely. Greta Vargat died immediately on the spot. Looking back, the warrior notices a person watching everything closely. With her face covered by a hood, the woman seemed extremely mysterious and intriguing. Shortly after, Vargat's body had already turned to ashes. Curious, Zeke wonders who that girl in the forest was, believing she might be a mage from the Draco family. Her beautiful face is revealed as she removes her hood. The hero realizes that the girl in front of him was very beautiful. Shortly after, she calls him by name, Zeke Steelwell. Without understanding anything, the hero seems confused about how the girl knew him. He tries to recall in his memories if he had ever seen the young woman before, but he doesn't remember that face. Shrugging, the girl realizes that the man in front of her was not Zeke Steelwell. The atmosphere completely changed, taking on an air of tension. The young woman's expression shifts as she realizes that the person in front of her was Zeke Moore. Wasting no time, the warrior charges with his sword, but is stopped by a magical barrier. The sorceress pushes his body away with her powers. Confused, He doesn't understand how that woman knew his Demon King name since it didn't exist in that world. Determined, he questions the girl about how she knows that name. However, everything falls into complete silence. Realizing the girl didn't want to answer, he tries to change his strategy by inviting her out. Deep down, he was very interested in that beautiful face. Suddenly, the woman begins casting new attack spells. While releasing her powers, she remarks that this was a strange way of inviting someone to dinner. Zeke tries to dodge the magic, realizing the attacks were powerful and fast. Without wasting time, the girl keeps chanting complex names to defend herself. The protagonist believes she was using shortcuts to reduce spellcasting time. Stopping to think, he concludes that she was capable of creating a magical barrier in seconds. Lowering his guard, his leg is struck by a painful blow. At that moment, he realizes he was fighting against a high-level sorceress. Meanwhile, the girl gathers all her magic to create something grand. Shortly after, she floats into the sky with her magical barrier. Zeke attempts a stealthier approach using intense movements. With a leap, he reaches high up, ready to strike his sword at the target. Crouched, the sorceress continues chanting the most powerful spells she knows. Suddenly, a stone barrier blocks the warrior's precise attack. At that moment, he realizes he was dealing with someone experienced in combat. The girl's gaze shows a mixture of anger and intimidation. The stone continues growing in size until it strikes Zeke with a heavy blow. Surrounded by flames around her body, she seems determined to end the boy's life. Shortly after, a fireball is launched in the protagonist's direction. Realizing a powerful attack was coming his way, he decides to throw his sword into the middle of the flames. The power of the weapon penetrates the fireball instantly. An explosion occurs in the forest big enough to break Zeke's weapon. Now without his sword, he would have to use his own body as a means of defense. With a punch, he charges once again against the fireball. His blow is so powerful and effective that it causes the spell to return toward the woman. Even protected inside her magical barrier, she is hit by the shards. Touching her body, she realizes the spell wasn't enough. The sorceress grows increasingly irritated with her opponent. Zeke seems to enjoy noticing the irritation on her face. Even injured, she tries to cast another spell against her enemy. The young man's expression completely changes upon seeing what awaited him. A huge and sharp ice crystal was pointed in his direction. With a punch, he manages to destroy the threat, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. A proficient battle mage would keep launching magical attacks at the enemy. That's why he couldn't understand that strange delay. Besides, he himself had already faced bad situations since his regression. But the reason was that his body couldn't handle all the combat experience. Zeke knew that all that technique was far too precise for someone the girl's age. Another important fact was that she knew his old name. Piecing the facts together, he manages to think more wisely. Perhaps the girl in front of him was also a regressor. His assumptions start making more sense, even though the woman's movements were strange for a regressor. Moreover, she didn't seem to have any tolerance for pain. However, none of that made sense for someone with combat abilities. Not being used to pain was truly unusual. Even though he couldn't fully describe it, he guesses that she only absorbed experience artificially into her body. The protagonist's attention shifts to the other side as he hears his name being called. Joheim seems worried about his comrade upon noticing that he was injured, but the protagonist says it was nothing serious and asks him to step away from the fight. One of his soldiers calls attention to another area of the forest. Curious, the young master asks if Zeke managed to eliminate Vargat, but the hero knew that scene hadn't been caused by him. With just one attack, the stranger in front of him burned Vargat's body. Even confused, a soldier holds his sword ready to attack a possible enemy. However, the protagonist pulls memories from the beginning of the fight and reveals that he was the one responsible for the first attack. Thinking it over, he reflects that there was no reason to fight the woman except for the fact that she knew the name Zeke more. Besides everything, she finished off Fest for them without any problems. Suddenly, the hero starts apologizing for his attitude. Now he was curious to know the identity of the stranger. The one asks if all those men were his subordinates, but he replies no. In fact, all those men in the forest were collaborators. Not understanding what the term means, the sorceress seems intrigued, but Zeke simply reaffirms what he had said. At that moment, he thanks the girl for having taken down Greta Vargat, who was the person causing tragedies in the village. However, the mage seems unable to believe that situation. The protagonist is confused by the situation, but he reveals all his astonishment upon realizing that at that moment, Zeke cared about the people in the village, since it wasn't something the great Demon King was used to doing. Meanwhile, the hero reflects on whether the woman really knew him from before his regression. The Demon King Zeke Moore no longer existed in that present. The two continue staring at each other without saying a word. Suddenly, the soldier becomes irritated with the way the sorceress spoke to the hero of Osprey. Increasingly confused, she cannot believe that the man in front of her was a hero. With determination, the soldier explains that the man had done many good things for the village. At that moment, the woman decides to ask what the man's surname is. Even without knowing how much she knew about him, he informs her that the image she had of him was not accurate. Thinking a little more, the woman starts noting something different. Impatient, the protagonist starts realizing that she would not reveal her identity, and by doing so, she would be considered an intruder. With one hand, she holds a precious stone to her chest. The energy spreads throughout the forest so powerfully that the men have to shield their eyes. Zeke realizes that the necklace around the sorceress's neck was an artifact. The light around her body keeps intensifying as her expression shows a certain disappointment. Shortly after, the sorceress's body completely disappears. Teleportation was a type of magic used by great mages, something very special. The hero became increasingly curious to know who the woman was. The day arrives with rays of sunlight surrounding the Great Tower. Joheim is saddened by the loss of his relatives and wonders if his father and brother made it to heaven. However, the warrior beside him states that the two would experience their sins, and he was sure they were prepared for it, as difficult as it might be. Joheim decides to thank Zeke for organizing the funeral for his loved ones. In addition, he seems disappointed for not organizing a search party for the sorceress. However, the protagonist knows it would be impossible to track her due to her teleportation artifact. Besides, the woman seemed to know a lot about his past, making it a personal matter. The two begin saying their goodbyes since Zeke would continue his journey with his two companions. Shyly, Drackle asks if the warrior wouldn't be interested in working for them since he would receive the best treatment. But Zeke declines the offer, especially because he was sure the new count would take very good care of the city. Despite everything, the true savior of Osborne was the protagonist who helped them with everything. Moreover, Joheim couldn't bear seeing all that blood during the fights, fainting as soon as it was all over. He still considered having hemophobia something pathetic for the Count of Drackle's territory. Noticing his comrade's distress, he takes something from his bag, leaving the young master terrified. Once again, he had the chance to try that bloody vessel offered earlier in the prison. Nervously, the master realizes it was the same artifact that had been offered to him in the cell. After the battle, Zeke was able to retrieve the item from the pile of dirt. He explains that one day hemophobia would become a major obstacle as a lord, so he should try the item. Zeke hands the orb to his comrade, informing him that he would have authority over the blood around him. However, if he started manipulating the blood too much, things could get dangerous. Curiously, Joheim wanted to know if there was any way to prevent the desire for the blood of other people. But Zeke firmly states that if he ever became a bad person, the hero would return to the village to kill him. Night falls around the castle, which remains lit. In an office, someone seems focused on their tasks. Upon hearing a noise at the door, they ask for the employee to come in. Holding a stack of papers, the soldier informs that these were the additional documents. Even tired, he realizes that the night would be long with that amount of work ahead. After taking the bloody vessel, the lord seemed much calmer and healthier. Curious, the warrior asks how his relationship with blood is going. For now, everything seemed fine as long as he didn't control other people's blood. Seeing the blood manipulation spreading through the room, his subordinate becomes quite interested. Since the lord acquired the artifact, he had been practicing ways to defend himself, believing it was a good idea. Despite everything, the soldiers still seem intrigued about how Zeke knew all of that. However, they didn't need to understand his motivations or even his real identity since he had saved the city. Changing the subject, the Count stood up from his chair and revealed that he would like to research something more deeply. Looking out the window, he seemed intrigued by the sorceress and the Black Hoods and wanted to learn more about them. Meanwhile, the three travelers were resting peacefully in the middle of the forest. Zeke appeared thoughtful, trying to figure out the identity of that woman, since she knew that he used to be Zeke more before his regression. Furthermore, the sorceress seemed to be at a level similar to the demon of sorcery, one of the demon kings who stood beside Zeke, responsible for bringing terror to the world. Since they had fought a few times, he knew that the demon used all types of magic spells freely. However, that demon king was a very old man. That's why he still wasn't sure of the stranger's identity and would be incapable of forgetting such a beautiful face. If the woman had regressed like him, how could she be related to the key that distorts destiny? Furthermore, she could be the one responsible for transplanting the item into him, but all of that was just speculation. Even so, Zeke couldn't get her face and facial expressions out of his mind. Curious, he couldn't understand how the woman was watching him. Suddenly, Hans calls for the master, who was lost in his thoughts. The warrior's gaze reflects certain doubts, questioning the priority of killing Lady Vargot over saving Osprin. Zeke was very capable of understanding the boy's afflictions, since it was difficult to justify certain sacrifices. As a provocation, Zeke asks if Hans wanted to become a hero or a god. The protagonist teaches that delaying difficult decisions only made things worse. Suddenly, Hans asks if the leader believed he could become a hero, but the master doesn't confirm anything to the boy, saying he should follow his instincts. Now that he was his subordinate, he would be guided and receive great help in everything. While the two were talking, Snock and Noam were in a deep sleep. Zeke gives tips to the boy, informing him that he should become stronger and stronger. In the end, the only way out would be to train and give his best in every situation. The next day, the sun begins to rise in the middle of the mountains. Fierce and hungry wolves find the three travelers ready to attack. Snock observes the creatures and waits for the right moment. Realizing that the wolves were advancing, he starts preparing his spells. Shortly after, his magic is enough to defeat one of the dangerous enemies. The exhaustion on the boy's face becomes evident due to the great effort he made. Even so, there were still some wolves left, ready for a meal. Suddenly, a noise can be heard coming from the other direction. Hans appears imposingly and attacks the creatures with his powerful sword. After the battle ends, Zeke approaches to observe the condition of his subordinates. Those monsters were definitely defeated by the young men's abilities. Intrigued, Hans questions the reason for so many monsters inside the forest. Additionally, Snak informs that there was a village near the region, but Zeke already seemed to reflect on the situation due to the abundance of monsters. Shortly after, a voice calls for the three travelers. An old man with specific clothes and a very sharp spear appears, looking pressured by the strength of the outsiders. Curious, he asks if they would be able to help him with a little hand. The man says that in the middle of those mountains there were orcs and asks if they could deal with the threat. The protagonist reflects on the possibility of the creatures attacking the visitors in the forest. Together, they analyze a giant footprint on the ground. Snatch talks to his pet, showing the possible path of the orc. Hans asks if they might have to face an entire tribe of orcs, but Zeke couldn't answer that for sure since he would have to investigate further. Snak asks if the master could track them with just a footprint. Despite everything, the hero wasn't very good at tracking. That's why they would have to use a different, more common strategy. Zeke informs them that they should walk, look, listen, and feel. At that moment, his subordinates realized that the boss had no plan in mind. Even though he wasn't on the level of professionals, the hero had a little knowledge about tracking. His senses were capable of covering a large area, and Hans and Snop were fast walkers. Therefore, he believed that in a few days they would be able to find the orcs. Suddenly, he notices that something's approaching him, believing it to be an undead. Hans and Snak become scared upon noticing the thinness of the child lost in the middle of the forest. The boy seemed to be very hungry and had no idea about anything. A piece of bread is offered to him when they realize he could barely stand. Upon noticing the food, the boy's gaze goes toward the possible savior. With a smile on his face, Zeke offers the bread to the boy, saying it was very tasty. They continued their search while spending the night at an inn in the nearby city. After a few days, they found the orcs in their domain. Defeating those enemies was a piece of cake. In the end, he didn't accept any kind of payment from the old man for his efforts. The town chief called them saviors and offered a nice dinner. The boy they found in the mountains felt scared by any kind of approach. The poor child was suspicious of anyone who appeared in his path. Zeke offered him another piece of bread, making the boy very grateful for the gesture. In the end, the boy helped the hero in return for his acts of kindness. But the boy says he wasn't there just to get food. His mother had told him not to accept donations from strangers, but Zeke wasn't a bad person. At that moment, he asks if the man in front of him was a good person, but he gets scared when he receives a negative answer. With a smile on his face, the protagonist says he's a bad person trying to do good things. Night was falling, and the boy seemed to enjoy every bite of that delicious bread. Due to his hunger, he ended up eating very quickly. Zeke also offered him a bit of water. Taking a handkerchief from his pocket, the warrior realized that the child would take the rest for his relatives who worked hard all day. Curious, the master asks if the people who received the food thought that was a strange gesture. But the boy says his relatives didn't say anything about receiving food. Everyone in that city knew the man was a good person for defeating the orcs in the forest. The protagonist's self-esteem begins to rise quickly with the compliments. Zeke tells him that next time he shows up, he wouldn't need to stay outside like a criminal. However, he knew he would receive certain insults if someone like him entered a fancier place. Despite his concerns, Zeke had already informed everyone about the child. Confused, the boy didn't seem to understand the kindness of that man, since everyone else hated him. He relates his kindness to what Timmy had said. In the past, someone chose to help them without expecting anything in return. Zeke tells the boy that he believed he was cooler than the other people, but the child reminds him of his statement about being bad. Correcting his statement, he shows that he was a bad person trying to be cooler than good people. Laughing uncontrollably, the child realizes that none of those sentences made any sense. The two laugh together as the protagonist states that there are strange people in the world. In the end, the boy says he hopes there are more people like him because everything would become better. Noticing it was getting later and later, the child says goodbye to the master and leaves. Suddenly, Zeke remembers something and turns around, but the boy had already left. A very poor house is shown from afar. The child runs to meet his mother and father, thinking that both would be happy to have something to eat. Next time he met the master, he would ask for his name, because one day he wanted to return all the favors to him. In the middle of the dark forest, the boy watches two people making a deal. They exchange a bag that seems to contain valuable coins. Realizing it was a dangerous place, the boy decides to run faster. Suddenly, the man removes his hood, noticing that a little rat was watching. Nervous, the boy becomes terrified upon realizing he was discovered and drops the bread on the ground. Meanwhile, Zeke was inside his accommodation with his two subordinates. Next time he met the boy, he would offer something different from bread. Even having gotten very close to the boy, he still didn't know his name. In the middle of the forest, the boy falls into despair, not knowing how to escape that situation. The next morning, the three return to the forest to defeat more monsters. Snotch explains that even after searching the entire area, those were the only enemies found. At that moment, Zeke begins to reflect that there would be no more threat in the region. The number of predatory beasts also decreased, so the monsters had to migrate to the region due to some power imbalance. That village should be safe from monster and beast attacks for some time. Now they could prepare to continue their journey and leave. Upon returning to the village, they are welcomed with thanks for their help. The old man thanks them immensely for saving all the inhabitants, not knowing how to repay such a huge favor. Hans seems to love that kind of gratitude, saying he hadn't done anything special. Suddenly, Snock realizes that it had been a while since they had seen that child. Before leaving, Zeke really wanted to find the boy. Suddenly, someone asks if they were talking about the child who lives beyond the wooden fences. A man also comments that the boy used to show up to help with some tasks but had been missing in recent days. Snock seems worried while Hans assumes the child might have visited a different village. Zeke starts walking and calls his subordinates. Curious, Snock asks if the master had any destination in mind. Hans is completely shocked to realize that the leader had no clear path to follow. However, he was determined to go to the little child's house. Shortly after, they arrive at a much poorer village. The boys seem intrigued to realize that people could live in such conditions. Using his powers, Zeke is unable to sense any kind of presence in the area. Even so, he was determined to search for the child. Suddenly, his expression changes completely upon sensing something strange. Shortly after, he makes precise jumps onto the rooftops. Standing in front of a wooden door, he starts to feel as if someone was dying. Without wasting time, he kicks the door down with determination. The scene is horrifying, injured bodies lying on the ground. Realizing that those two were dead, he tries to search for the survivor. Leaning against a wall is the small child with a tattoo on his chest. In complete desperation, Zeke tries to wake the boy, who doesn't respond. However, he realizes that the child was still breathing and could use a potion on him. Shortly after, something strange starts to come out of the tattoo. The child's eyes begin to open upon sensing the presence of the master. Zeke explains that he came after him after noticing his disappearance, and the boy seems to understand completely. The protagonist asks who was responsible for that destruction, but the child didn't know. He only says that there was a stranger in the middle of the night. Shortly after, he finished off his father and mother without showing any mercy. On top of that, the man said he would keep his parents alive if the boy didn't scream during the torture. Even so, Zeke realizes that the man didn't keep his promise, seeming to enjoy every minute of the situation. After doing that to his parents, he went after the rest of the people in the village. Crying, the boy seems unable to bear so much suffering, since that person blamed him for everything. Touching his head, Zeke asks the boy not to feel bad because none of that was his fault. The child was unable to see his face but knew he was bald and had a strange tattoo covering half of his face. Suddenly, he clutches his chest, feeling a strange pain. Using his powers, Zeke tries to help the boy and heal him. A grand energy spreads throughout the environment, and shortly after, the pain disappears from the boy's body. Now the protagonist asks the boy to stay calm since he would take care of his situation. Even so, the boy was very weak and ends up losing his strength and fainting. Before leaving, the hero places a piece of bread near the boy's hand. His attention turns to the door upon hearing a strange noise. His subordinates are shocked by the situation they witnessed, unable to believe what happened. Zeke stands up shortly after and asks them to be ready to leave. The destination would be to find the person who would help them get revenge for that child. The three stand in front of a bonfire house used to burn the corpses. Shaken by the situation, Snot wishes that everyone finds eternal rest. Hans didn't expect that the boss would organize a funeral for a boy he had only seen a few times. Besides, he was willing to avenge his death. Therefore, the warrior believed that his motivation wasn't just justice. Despite wanting to do kind things, Lord Zeke wasn't the type of person motivated by that ideal. However, the fact that his kindness had become meaningless with the boy's death, and that someone he liked was tortured to death could be two things that wounded the master's ego. The next morning, there were only the bones of all those humans. The hero collected the remains and stored them in a large jar. Now they were ready to leave together. The destination was a very beautiful place, different from that village that only contained destruction. The beautiful young woman opens a heavy door and is surprised by something in front of her. The old man Wige returns the look to the girl with a smile on his face. Shortly after, the girl informs that her prayers were good. At that moment, he informs her that the young woman had visitors. Confused, she seems not to understand who would show up in that place to see her. Meanwhile, the three are sitting at a table having tea. The boys reflected that the Order of the Carwoodmen is much bigger than they imagined, and Zeke had good connections. Upon seeing her visitors, the girl is very surprised by the presence of Zeke. Old Wige seemed very pleased to see that Zeke was well. Shaking his hand, he seems unable to get used to the machine of a smyung. With a smile on her face, the young woman starts talking to Hans. However, she did not know Snock, nor does Mole Nouwen. With a smile on his face, the master informs that he heard the news. Soon, the girl would receive the middle name Pramel, which is given only to saints. Wige says that the young woman only needed to accomplish one more small thing before obtaining the name. Zeke decides to make a bold proposal as a form of last achievement. His goal is to go after something big and luxurious, which makes the two curious to know more. With determination in his eyes, the hero offers the opportunity to eradicate the northern branch of Vald. The girl is completely shocked upon hearing the revelation. Wige wonders if those responsible for the boy's death were the bastards from Vald. Zeke recognized the burned symbol on the boy's chest, a type of powerful dark magic that ensures the person does not die. Hans seems confused to hear that conversation. There was a type of spell that merges a person's vital energy with their dark energy to keep them alive even with lethal wounds. It's usually used when torturing someone, being a way to play with human bodies. Wige asks for any other information about the person who did that to the child. but he only knew that the man was bald and had tattoos covering half of his face. Suddenly, someone mentions the name Colin Trisloa at the table. The hero realizes that the girl had knowledge about the wanted man. He is one of the cardinals of Vald, being one level below the Pope, and is famous for committing all kinds of evil acts. At that moment, the soldier begins to realize that Colin was inside that village. Zeke assumes that the man stopped to buy some kind of food and ended up finding some fun along the way. The dead were those who lived in the slums, so the village would not have made a big deal out of it. The strangest thing was that the mountains near that village had a sudden influx of monsters, even with orcs. Reflecting, Wige realizes that something was very wrong. Upon realizing that the opponent was from Vald, the man informs that he and the Carwoodmen were willing to fight. To make it easier, Zeke knew the location of the northern branch of Vald and other bases. With a smile on his face, Wige seems unable to believe that the boy had all that information. Even though it is very difficult to obtain that kind of information, the hero informs that it was just a coincidence. In addition to the Porty incident with the magic seal, the warrior was knowledgeable about many things. The seal magic was one of those performed before his regression. First, they would check the northern branch guided by the master's command. Wige informs that if that were destiny, the Trislos could be in management. The protagonist was filled with rage and thirst for revenge. Thanks to that tattooed man, he was unable to hear the name of the child. The scenery completely changes to a deserted restaurant. Mr. Wige rides while reflecting on what was before his eyes. Observing the landscape, he reveals that he had no knowledge of the existence of that place. Zeke believed that the man in front of him had already known almost everything in the world, but he was wrong. At that moment, he realizes that it would be impossible to have knowledge of all God's creations. The protagonist realizes that this was the kind of thinking of religious people. Finally, Wige informs that if Zeke were capable of developing faith in the god Karna, he would think similarly. Despite the offers, the protagonist seemed uninterested in the Carwoodmen. Suddenly, the old man starts to doubt the location of the northern branch of Vald. The god of Vald is a god of water. That is why some rumors said that their temples need to be near water. However, the visited place seemed extremely dry. With a smile on his face, the protagonist says that this is why no one was able to find the location. Wige realized that his words made sense, since it would be a complete disguise. Shortly after, a powerful wind hits both of them. Zeke informs that they should continue the crossing by going a little further. They leave the horses near the mountains and continue the road on foot. Calmly, the two walk together looking for clues. A gigantic hole indicates that this was the entrance to Vald. Determined, they enter the dark cave holding lamps to light the way. Wige seems impressed by something that comes in front of him. The place is illuminated by a fluorescent energy of bright blue color. Astonished, the knight did not expect a lake beneath such arid lands. Suddenly, they observe people walking on the other side. Without wasting time, they settle behind a rock to avoid being seen. Zeke and Wige try to observe more carefully. At the back of the cave, there was a grand palace covered by waters. At the top of the building was the mark of Vald. At that moment, Wige realizes that they really had a temple inside there. Zeke asks if his friend is now able to believe in his words. Holding his hand, he informs that he will prepare the best Carwoodmen. Upon returning, everyone is seated at a grand table. The Carwoodman Pope seems delighted to finally meet the protagonist. Despite everything, he seemed intrigued by something that lingered in his mind. Zeke did not expect to see the creator of zombies from the era of the Demon King so close. He used to heal the paladins from the rear and made sure the knights simply wouldn't die because of him. At that time, the protagonist was almost killed. Moreover, he did not believe he would ever meet the Pope since he rarely received visitors. Suddenly, the religious man starts thanking him for the location of Vald. But the protagonist had his own intentions when cooperating with them. With curiosity, the Pope asks about his personal revenge. His goal was to infiltrate the temple while the forces attacked the rest. Suddenly, he is shocked by the question about killing the man responsible for the child's death. However, the hero had no intention of making things easier, shocking everyone around. Upon realizing his intentions, the Pope feels a bit frightened. But in the end, he understands his motivations since Colin Trisloa was an evil man. Despite everything, the opponent was very strong and should not be underestimated. Colin was as strong as a high-ranking priest of the Carwoodmen. That's why the religious leader wanted to make sure that Zeke would be alright. The boy simply responds that he would not get in his way. The plan would be completely confidential since they couldn't risk leaked information. Moreover, the three could stay inside the temple seeking greater safety. Suddenly, a voice calls for His Holiness. Calmly, Zeke asks the Pope for a favor. With his hand on his chest, he would like to receive a title as an honorary paladin. Everyone around the table is shocked by his words. But the Pope is curious to know the reason for the request. The protagonist reveals that he had no special reason. But having such a title could irritate Trisloa even more. The day went by and the sky took on an orange hue. The protagonist's personality is discussed as something unique. Wige says that the young man might be strange but was extremely skilled and would not embarrass them even with the title. Agreeing with the statements, the Pope decides to accept the young master's request. Furthermore, there was someone as strong and good as Mr. Zeke among the honorary paladins. Therefore, the Pope would like to make that man join the battle as well. Recalling his memories, the religious leader tries to remember the name of the knight called Gren Zennard. Upon hearing the mention of that name, the girl becomes a little intrigued. Noticing her hesitation, the Pope asks if there is any problem. Whenever Grenzenard met the girl, he asked if she had any problems in her life to discuss with him. Laughing, Wige says that the knight was probably interested in the girl. In any case, the man could not participate because he was in another place that was difficult to contact. Meanwhile, the girl seems embarrassed by the whole situation. Wige asks if he should talk to the warrior about the situation, but she immediately refuses. In the end, she says she believed the man was not interested in her. Deep down, she assumed he had different intentions. It seemed that Grenzenard was searching for something. Meanwhile, the caravan was moving quickly through the desert. Warriors mounted on their horses were guided by Wige. Inside the wagon, people were praying, asking for protection in the fight. Suddenly, the master asks everyone to stop moving. Finally, they had arrived at the entrance of the cave. At that moment, the girl realizes that everything was about to begin. Wige was eager to bring judgment to the bastards of Vald. Dismounting his horse, the protagonist warns that he would be the first to enter. His plan remained the same, intending to infiltrate the temple. The girl seemed worried about something that was bothering her mind. However, Zeke tries to reassure her by saying that if he were caught, he wouldn't have any valuable information to reveal. Noticing that the girl wasn't worried because of that, he asked her to stop worrying. Before leaving, he asked them to take care of his subordinates until his return, having trained them to defend themselves. As a joke, he says that if the two ended up dead, it would be a sadness. Saying goodbye to everyone, he jumps into the cave. Meanwhile, people seem worried about the master's safety. Wige realizes there was no other choice but to fully trust Zeke. Walking towards the place, they move forward together, ready to start the battle. Suddenly, soldiers scream in despair, warning about an emergency. The warning was that the Carwomen were very close to the lake. The troops advanced with all their strength and agility, while the others defended the rear. A boy leaning against a door notices the strange movement inside the temple. Shortly after, he wonders if something was happening, but a hand grabs his head and pulls him back. Zeke was already infiltrated inside the place, carrying out all his work. At that moment, he realized that there were no complex differences. The protagonist was worried that things might be different after the regression, but everything was the same. Since he was alone, he was able to swim stealthily through the lake. Thinking that the Carwomen might be doing well, he decided to focus on what really mattered. Suddenly, he realizes he is in front of the prayer room where the most important item was probably kept. Without wasting time, he opens the large and heavy doors. Inside the room, he observes a strange triangular object that reflects an intense light that seemed valuable enough to Trisloa, being something of high priority to him. With a smile on his face, Zeke looks happy for arriving first. Now he should sit in the place and wait for the man. Outside the temple, a large explosion throws debris everywhere. The soldiers fight fiercely to defeat their enemies. In despair, a man reports that the opponents were approaching through the lake. The estimated number of soldiers was around 1,000, making everything even more difficult. Moreover, 1,000 was the total number of people inside the temple. Apparently, they were all Grail Knights or High Priests. Callan Trisloa seems irritated upon realizing that the enemies were able to find them. Requesting reinforcements was out of the question, and the Carwomen were extremely powerful. The order given was to stop the advance of enemy troops through the lake. The subordinate immediately passes on the orders given by his master. Looking more carefully at the situation, Callan waits for the perfect opportunity. While the soldier takes care of the troops, he decides to go check his valuable item. Quickly, he descends the stairs without looking back. Without much concern, the tattooed man just wanted to ensure the item's safety and pray for victory. Upon arriving at the place, he is completely terrified. Zeke had already made the valuable item of Trisloa disappear. Irritated, he begins to realize that the person in front of him was responsible for the whole situation. The guru states that he was someone who had a personal revenge against him. The cardinal cannot believe it and charges against his opponent. Suddenly, he stops instantly when he notices the protagonist's expression as he mentions his full name. With a furious look, he asks if that man was responsible for the child's death. Confused, the cardinal seems not to remember any similar situation. Increasingly irritated, he cannot believe that the person in front of him invaded the temple to talk about nonsense. In the end, he says he cannot remember all the people he killed throughout his life. Shortly after, his troops gather behind him. With just one order, they would be responsible for eliminating the threat. Sadly, the protagonist wished he had heard from the man's mouth his reasons for ending the life of a simple child. Zeke asks if he doesn't remember killing residents of a poor village and torturing a helpless child. Suddenly, his face changes and he admits being responsible for the tragedy. That night, his goal was simply to get some food in the city. But suddenly, he decided to change his plans when he found the boy and decided to wipe out all the residents of the place. The boy's family and the neighbors were compared to a package. In the end, he blamed the death of everyone in the village on a single child. Since they were killed by him, one of the people blessed by Vald, they could see that situation as an honor. Zeke asks if the man was able to tell the child that it was his fault. With a wicked smile, he shows that he wanted to teach him the true meaning of responsibility. The protagonist reflects on each of his words. Suddenly, the cardinal realizes that he had no time for discussions since the soldiers kept advancing. Trisloa is shocked to hear the revelation from the boy in front of him. With determination, Zeke states that he was the one responsible for bringing the Carwoodman to the temple with the goal of putting an end to Callan. However, the man seemed unable to believe in the possibility of being killed by a boy like that. With sadness in his eyes, he says that he knew the child he had killed. The cardinal seems unable to believe that he was capable of doing all that because of just one child. Repeating his words, he says that the man explained that everyone in that slum died because of the boy. They wouldn't have to meet if he had simply sat in the temple and never left again. But at that moment, he was determined to wipe out everyone who stood in his way. Zeke states that everything that was happening was Colin Trisloa's fault. Realizing the insolence of his enemy, the cardinal becomes increasingly irritated. Suddenly, he unleashes his powers, flooding the room with all his magic. The water spells go in Zeke's direction as he waits for the right opportunity. With a leap, he realizes that his power was truly strong, capable of killing anyone. Using one of his hands, he grabs onto an artifact fixed on the wall. From a distance, the cardinal observes his opponent's curious movements. As a provocation, he was willing to teach the man the true meaning of responsibility. Laughing, he says that the fish-headed fool from Vald wasn't able to teach his soldiers that they should take responsibility for their actions. Colin becomes even more irritated with the boy's abuses and once again shows his spells. He floods the room, making Zeke's body be carried by the magic, but the protagonist manages to hold onto a window. Tired of waiting, the man orders his men to attack. Numerous sharp knives fly toward the hero. Suddenly, he grabs his sword and shows all his skill. The enemies are stunned by the young man's powers, who didn't suffer a single scratch. Sheathing his weapon, he tells the men not to get too excited. After all, they might end up destroying the valuable item he carried with him. Trisloa cannot believe that this boy had been arrogant enough to steal that item. That artifact, named Vengeful Spirit of the Pyramid, was used to control monsters. Confused, the cardinal questions how such a young boy had so much knowledge. Suddenly, the pyramid begins to glow in his hands. The Vengeful Spirit of the Pyramid is an artifact that allows one to control any monster. For this, the negative emotions of an innocent soul were necessary. Before the regression, Val used cruel methods to complete the Vengeful Spirit of the Pyramid, including torturing a child. Most likely, torturing the child was just a way to fulfill the requirements. Furthermore, the appearance of monsters in the forest could indicate an instinctive search for the artifact. Hanging on the window, Zeke threatens to break the valuable item at any moment. However, Trisloa knew that the pyramid could not be easily destroyed, unlike the fragile body of the boy. Showing his powers, he says that he was predestined to kill a boy in the most painful way possible. Suddenly, magic is cast toward the boy. Zeke lets go of the window ledge and tries to dodge those instinctive attacks. With a smile on his face, Trisloa asks how long he thinks he can run from his magic. The hero is fully capable of handling the minions, but could not defeat Colin in that state. At that moment, he admits that the man was stronger than him, and it would be foolish to engage in a fight. The cardinal would not let the protagonist escape in any way. Meanwhile, he grabs onto one of the bricks in the wall. Without thinking twice, he starts climbing with all his strength. Trisloa seems unable to understand his opponent's objective. Shortly after, he notices something strange higher up in the structure. Zeke is standing in front of a secret passage, warning that he would escape through that route. Before leaving, he throws a provocation at the soldiers. In the northern branch of Vald's underground prison, some lights illuminate a path. The hero appears with numerous keys in his hand, capable of opening any door. Inside the cells, the prisoners seemed extremely enraged. With a smile on his face, the hero asks if those people would like to take revenge. The fight continued intensely inside the temple. The soldiers were doing everything possible to stop the Carwoodmen. They needed to make sure none of them would enter the temple. Suddenly, the environment is overtaken by a tremendous power. The spell flies toward Lord Wige, who remains still. The priests begin to pray, begging for help from the goddess Karna. Shortly after, the spell is dissipated by the environment. One of the subordinates reports that the soldiers who crossed the lake were defeated. Irritated, Wige realizes that he would have to join the fight. Holding his sword, he displays a frightening expression. With a leap, he advances closer to the temple, causing an explosion that sends debris flying everywhere. However, the place was protected by a powerful shield. The barrier was stronger than expected, capable of blocking multiple attacks. Even so, the strike was enough to take down all the soldiers near the lake. Now they had a perfect chance to cross to the other side. With determination, the soldier hammers a stake into the ground. Shortly after, they placed the pieces of wood into the water. Using the full strength of the troops, they were able to create a bridge to the temple. Upon hearing the order to attack, the paladins began to run into battle. On the other side, the enemies noticed the approach of the Carwoodmen. At that moment, they had to do everything to contain the threat. Using powerful spells, the man tried to destroy the bridge they had built. Even with the danger warnings, Miss Luvella seemed to fear nothing. Holding her cross, she prayed to the goddess Karna to bless the faithful with strength. Meanwhile, Wige and his soldiers tried to get closer and closer. His powerful strikes showed all of his talent and skill. Shortly after, no cracks appeared on the shield. The sickly aura of Vald wasn't paying attention to the other paladins because they were focused on Wige. For now, the best thing to do was to stand still while the soldiers fought bravely. Even so, they realized they were still at a disadvantage. But if the barrier disappeared, they could damage the base, gaining an advantageous position. Now they had to hope Zeke was capable of breaking the barrier. Inside the temple, the situation was desperate. Callan was desperate to find the boy who had stolen the sacred relic. His only goal was to retrieve the valuable item. Even searching every corner, the soldiers could not find Zeke anywhere. The cardinal couldn't believe that the boy knew a secret route that even he didn't know about. The soldier reports that the man was moving out of sight. Suddenly, Trisloa kicks the subordinate with all his strength. Angrily, he repeats that the boy had the vengeful spirit of the pyramid in his hands. Apologizing, the soldier says he would take another look at every place. As he walks away, the cardinal watches, increasingly irritated. He tries to calm his mind and think more clearly. Minutes earlier, the protagonist had stated that he was there for revenge. Furthermore, he was responsible for bringing the Cardwoodman to the temple. Considering his reaction to the relic, he apparently didn't come with the intention of stealing it. At that moment, the cardinal realizes that the boy's intentions were directed exclusively toward the barrier. Meanwhile, several people gathered around a statue to pray for protection. Silently, Zeke enters the sacred place without attracting attention. Even so, the knights sense his presence and draw their swords. To his surprise, Trisloa was able to sense his steps. In one of his hands, he begins to show his spells. After being hit, his clothes are stained with blood as he feels pain throughout his body. The cardinal and his soldiers had managed to arrive before the boy and set up an ambush. Without wasting time, he ordered his men to go after him. The main goal was to safely recover the sacred relic. The doors were slowly closing behind Callan. Meanwhile, the men continued praying fervently. Suddenly, more people began to enter the room. Zeke had freed the prisoners from the dungeons. He had given those men a chance to take revenge on the bastards who tried to sacrifice them. That's why they were already ready to strike down everyone protecting the barrier. Meanwhile, the cardinal and his soldiers found Zeke. Because he was weak and losing a lot of blood, he wasn't able to get very far. At that moment, Trisloa declared that this was the end for the boy. Suddenly, cracks began to form in the temple, bringing down stones from all sides. With a slight smile, Zeke realized that his plan had worked. The knights continued the fierce fight. Hans dodged a powerful strike using all the teachings of the master. Upon noticing the perfect opportunity, he struck his opponent's body. The young warrior was able to realize that his body was practically moving on its own. The effects of Zeke's training were truly something incredible. Meanwhile, more soldiers tried to stop the Cardwoodman. Stones emerged in the enemy's path, preventing their advance. Confused, the men seemed unable to understand the situation. From afar, Snock was using all his abilities to create destructive spells. If he could destroy that narrow path, he could eliminate them all. However, maybe it wasn't the best choice, since the effects could reverberate throughout the entire cave. Suddenly, everyone notices something different in the space. Shortly after, the shield begins to completely disappear. Without understanding anything, the soldiers are stunned by the situation. Wide realizes that Zeke was successful in his mission. Now they needed to be fast enough to prevent the components from rebuilding the barrier. The religious warriors head toward the temple, aiming to destroy the base with the help of the goddess Karna. Powerful spells strike the temple with full force. The entire structure was shaking as if it were a terrible earthquake. However, Callan asked his subordinates to remain calm. Zeke informs that the protective barrier disappeared, and that's why the structure was being attacked. Irritated, the man starts looking at him with increasing anger. The protagonist had to stop provoking for a moment while the others destroyed the barrier. He was the only invader inside the temple, but the others were outside. Those who helped him were the prisoners who were going to be used as sacrifices. Trisloa cannot believe that the brothers who protected the barrier were killed by offerings. Realizing that the man didn't believe him, Zeke started running uncontrollably. Callan was already prepared to cast another one of his spells. His magic tries to hit the boy, but ends up creating a crack in the wall. With a smile on his face, the boy starts finding the whole situation very interesting. The soldiers go after the protagonist, aiming to exterminate his existence. Callan Trisloa was determined to see how long the boy could escape his clutches. Shortly after, the hero was near a large door. The spells continued firing as fast as possible. With a kick, he breaks a piece of wood. Realizing he was invading the ritual room, Callan called for help from the paladins. The rest were to close the entrance and await further orders. With a smile on his face, the cardinal seemed happy to find the rat he was chasing. Suddenly, his expression changes when he sees the destruction caused in that place. The man couldn't believe what his eyes were witnessing. Shortly after, Zeke comes out from behind the large statue, noticing the shock on his opponent's face. At that moment, the tattooed man just wanted to know where the bastards responsible for the mess were. However, the hero couldn't provide that kind of information. He only assumed that the men had escaped through the secret passage he had shown them. Completely out of control and beside himself, the cardinal asked the reason for all of this. Zeke tells them to ask the fish head, who was watching everything closely. Trisloa couldn't believe the arrogant way the boy was speaking to Vald. Suddenly, he calls upon the great Vald without fear of anything. With his hands raised, he asks the god to show who was truly responsible for the mess. Quickly, the boy moves behind the statue. A voice begins to say that the blame for everything was on Cardinal Trisloa, for killing an innocent boy in the village, leading a man to develop a desire for revenge. That was the result of his own actions. Appearing again, the boy informs that now the cardinal had his answers. Truslowa's face reveals all his nervousness, unable to understand the situation. With a smile on his face, Zeke realizes that his mission was accomplished. The orders were to inspect every corridor of the temple and find the bastards of Vald. Zeke even decided to threaten the fish head if Callan turned against him. Furious, the man begins to prepare his powers again. Without thinking about the consequences, he casts spells at Zeke. But the boy is more skilled and manages to escape, destroying only the statue. Truslowa orders his subordinates to focus on killing every threat inside the temple. Obeying his orders, they seem prepared to fight bravely. From now on, it would be a race against time. Zeke knew he had to hold out until the Karwidman forces arrived. With his weapon in hand, the young man prepares for the attacks coming his way. Quickly, he delivers intense strikes to dodge the enchanted plates. He also throws one of them toward his opponent, hitting him in the chest. Truslowa becomes increasingly irritated with the boy's actions. Without wasting more time, he creates a powerful spell and casts it at the protagonist. Despite all his efforts, Zeke manages to get out unharmed. Shortly after, he seems cornered with no way out. Callan realizes this was the perfect chance to defeat the boy. Now all the soldiers would go together against that threat. The objective was to destroy Zeke and retrieve the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. Meanwhile, a powerful energy swept through the room with burning intensity. The soldiers were being struck one by one without time to react. Luvella and Wage appear in the room, ready to defend Zeke. The men start exchanging furtive glances, showing all their anger. The two apologize for the delay, but are happy to see that the protagonist was alright. Curious, the girl asks what the object in his hands was. Zeke explains that it was the vengeful spirit of the pyramid, a sacred relic. Once completed, it gave the owner the power to control all the monsters in the world. Shortly after, the warrior throws the artifact on the ground. With his sword, he threatens to destroy the object immediately. Truslowa becomes desperate and begs the boy to stop. Meanwhile, more soldiers begin to approach to continue the battle. Suddenly, Wage's figure appears stealthily to take down the enemies. Callan is shocked to realize the fury contained in the old man's attack. Zeke draws Truslowa's attention back to himself. Once again, the boy repeats the same words, stating that it was all his fault. Without mercy, he plunges his sword into the religious object. Truslowa becomes completely desperate when he realizes that the item was destroyed. Something starts coming out of the pyramid as he presses the sword. Kneeling, the cardinal realizes that his plans were completely ruined. Now was the perfect chance for Wise to release all the accumulated rage on the man's body. With one strike, he falls to the ground quickly, with no chance to defend himself. The knight notices that his master was injured. However, he is also attacked by the enemy soldiers. Truslowa's expression reveals all the fear contained in his spirit. Holding the sword, Wige was ready to show Karna's judgment. Suddenly, an explosion happens in the place unexpectedly. The novella watches the scene from afar, worried about Lord Wige's safety. Despite everything, the man was fine. Truslowa managed to create a barrier at the last second and escape. Now the best thing to do was to work together to inspect the temple. However, the girl's attention is drawn to another place. Zeke had also disappeared completely without leaving any trace. A person walks through a completely arid and dry place. Truslowa feels satisfied realizing that no one knew about that secret passage. Despite everything, he had never imagined that everything would collapse so easily. On top of everything, he had lost the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. Remembering the boy's face, he becomes increasingly furious. Now his life's goal would be to destroy Zeke. More than killing him, he was willing to show him a pain worse than death. His gaze turns frightened when he hears a familiar voice. At the top of the mountain, the protagonist was watching Truslowa. With a smile on his face, he says that he missed the cardinal. Confused, the man seems unable to understand how the young man managed to find him in that hideout. Zeke asks the man not to be so shocked by his skills. With a jump, he quickly moves closer to the cardinal. The protagonist knew a part of the temple that not even the locals were aware of. Impatient, the cardinal charges with his powers ready to be used. Zeke manages to contain his movements with just a few strikes. Suddenly, he launches an attack at Truslowa's stomach. The man starts to feel the pain spreading throughout his body. Meanwhile, Zeke seems ready for round 2 of the fight. Covering his nose, he notices something disgusting about his opponent. Even if Callan died there, he would still be a proud believer in Vald. However, he was determined to take the boy with him to hell. Despite everything, Zeke had no intention of killing him. He only wanted to cause him a lot of pain. Instead, his goal was to play a game where the man had to dodge all the traps before the sand and the hourglass ran out. If he came out victorious, he could leave peacefully. Zeke was already ready to start the game while arranging his object. Without wasting time, the cardinal began running desperately. In the middle of that arid place, he walked without knowing where to go. The first trap had a fairly simple difficulty. Irritated, Truslowa only thought about getting revenge on the young man as quickly as possible. He tries to cross, but one of his feet ends up injured by sharp spikes. At that moment, he had lost the first challenge. After getting out of the trap, he walks with some difficulty. Next time, he was determined not to fall for any kind of trick. However, he triggers the second trap by stepping on a line on the ground. Heavy cement balls are launched in his direction. Unable to dodge the hits, he loses again. With injuries on his face, he becomes increasingly furious. Meanwhile, the protagonist watches everything from the top of the mountain. Truslow had no idea how much time he still had to complete the mission. Even so, he tried to pay attention to everything around him so he wouldn't fall for any trick. Suddenly, a bit of water is poured over him. Confused, he seems unable to understand what just happened. Zeke approaches from behind and kicks his heels. The boy makes a joke saying there was nothing to get wet since the man was bald. The third trap was Zeke himself and had maximum difficulty. Time kept passing and the cardinal continued walking despite all the exhaustion. Finally, he manages to find the exit, but he decides to look around and try to find the boy. Zeke is holding a hard glass in his hands, which still contains a little bit of sand. At that moment, Truslow realizes that he was able to win the challenge. Shrugging, the protagonist assumes that he really was able to win, but he would not be merciful with him, so he strikes a blow to his chest. The cardinal feels all the pain spreading through his body while the young man shows no reaction. With strength, he pushes the sword deeper and deeper. The man falls to the ground, showing that he was too tired to fight. Smiling, Zeke states that he was a good liar and not someone trustworthy. Shortly after, he pushes Colin's body to the ground. Now they should proceed with the rescue measures for the poor soul. Zeke decides to bless the path he traveled in the name of Karna, whom they hate the most. Immediately, Truslow asks the boy to take that insignia away from his face. The protagonist informs him that he should atone for his sins before the poor boy of his family and the villagers. Reading a book, he informs that there would be a path leading to Karna. Besides that, he should not be afraid since the goddess would envelop him in light. All worries and fears related to vices would completely disappear upon being freed. Finally, his loyalty and faith would accompany him along the way. Suddenly, Truslow realizes that he might be dead. His body is located in a completely different and beautiful place. Suddenly, he feels a strange force coming from his side and believes it to be Valley. Finally, he would be rescued by Valley after all these years of devotion. A terrifying creature appears in front of him with its giant red eyes. Lying on the ground, the cardinal seems unable to understand what was happening before his eyes. To his surprise, the voice repeats the boy's words, saying that it was all his fault. Shortly after, Truslow takes his final breath. Zeke looks at the container with bones and claims to have completed his revenge. He calmly approaches and opens the jar. From now on, the child could go to a new place. The following day was marked by the destruction of the temple. The Carwidman and Zeke defeated the building of the northern branch of the Valo. Upon seeing Truslow's body, Wige said he wanted to display his head in front of the temple. But upon hearing the plans about how they would handle the body to avoid the Val funeral, he gave up on the idea. Shortly after, they all returned with their horses. Hans wanted to know if it was really okay for him to accompany the Carwidman. Zeke replied that it was no problem since they were both heading the same way. Either way, the fact of receiving help from those men ended up hurting his pride. Upon seeing Mr. Wige, the soldier seemed extremely happy. With a smile on his face, the old man seemed pleased to meet Twen. The knight explained that he came with allied forces to help but ended up arriving too late. While the two talked, the protagonist seemed bored. Suddenly, his eyes turned to a mysterious figure. In his past life, the Demon King had already met him and harbored some anger. That was Gren Zenner, looking magnificent atop his horse. Quickly, night falls over the camp. Delicious food was served on the table, showing a sense of abundance. Twen seemed happy to realize that only good things were happening to the Carwidman. Moreover, both sides had qualified honorary paladins. While drinking and eating, they talked about their recent victories. Zeke did not expect to encounter Gren Zenner on such an unusual occasion. Despite everything, the knights seemed happy to meet the man. However, Zeke simply introduces himself and decides to start the conversation with a question. Without any problems, the paladin shows interest in his doubts. Suddenly, Zeke repeats the phrase he had said in the past, claiming he hoped he would be good in his next life. Gren Zenner seems not to understand what he was questioning and looks a bit confused. With curiosity, he asks what motivated that strange question. But Zeke says nothing and remains completely silent. The two boys exchange glances while their masters watch attentively. Laughing, Zeke lies by saying it was just a line he heard in a soap opera and that the hero looked a lot like the paladin. Twen interrupts the conversation, saying that Zenner really did look like a hero. With a smile on his face, the boy seems embarrassed by the young man's kindness. Shortly after, he starts getting nervous upon hearing the voice of someone familiar. Luvella states that Zenner had already done a lot for the Carwidman, but Zeke was a true hero as well. However, she claimed that the young man didn't really look like a hero based on his appearance. While the two were talking like close friends, Zenner was observing the scene. Suddenly, he decides to intrude into the conversation and throws a provocation at the future saint, saying that the girl was behaving inappropriately. Upon hearing those words, she immediately apologizes. But Twen asks the girl to relax since saints could also joke with friends. Wige says that people had started liking the girl more thanks to her recent changes. Gren Zenner immediately starts apologizing for his words, but the girl says he doesn't need to apologize. Furthermore, thanks to Lord Zeke, the events in Porty were the turning point. With curiosity, the paladin asks what they were talking about since it seemed like an interesting conversation. Just like in the novel, there was someone who suggested that he should be kinder to others. It was because of that person that the protagonist started doing good deeds. It was a guy who was involved with justice, a type of person he personally didn't have much affection for. However, if he were to meet him again, he would like to say a few words. He was ready to explain that he was living his life as he had suggested, and it wasn't entirely bad. While they were talking, Hans, Snock, and Now devoured the food eagerly. Zeke asks Xenard's opinion about that philosophy of life. At that moment, he wanted to know if the paladin's question had been answered. Outside, 2 guards were walking calmly around the camp. Lying on his bed, Zeke was tired after a long day. Staring at the ceiling, he reflected on Gren Xenard. Deep down, he believed that the man wasn't a regressor and was incapable of knowing anything. If the key to changing fate was the reason for his regression, then maybe Xenard could have regressed too. However, he began to think that the key might have nothing to do with regression, or that man could be pretending not to have regressed and not to know him. Despite everything, he realized there was nothing more he could do. He didn't care whether Xenard had regressed or not, since he didn't intend to get involved with him. He just wanted to say that he was living his life as he had suggested, and it wasn't so bad. In this life, his connection with Gren Xenard ended now. In another tent, the paladin seemed deep in thought. His eyes carefully watched a lit candle as he thought about Zeke. His face was the same as he remembered Zeke's, but his actions and personality were completely different. The only thing he was sure of was that none of the demon kings of power was Zeke Moore, nor was he an heir of the Margrave Zeke Steelwall. At that moment, he began putting the pieces together and thought about Zeke Brave. However, he wasn't able to sense the aura of justice that exuded from the Brave family. In the end, there was only one possibility left, a variable. Despite all his thoughts, Xenard couldn't figure out the reason. If he started making moves on his own, it could cause a problem. Depending on the situation, Zeke changes, and Xenard knew this well, having lived hundreds or thousands of years longer than others. In the end, Zeke could become a threat to him. That's why he was considering whether the best solution would simply be to kill him. But before that, he needed to find out the reason for that variable. Besides that, he needed to find out whether the innocent Ain had also changed. Lastly, he had to understand who had caused Zeke's change. Suddenly, he starts to realize countless variables within the regression. For now, he should rest, create a plan, and send someone to watch Zeke. After all that, he would need to establish a countermeasure to reduce Valad's power. His thoughts turned to the phrase Zeke had said during dinner. Thinking about that, he couldn't sleep peacefully, wondering about the reason behind the question. The next day was sunny as Zeke said goodbye to Miss Lavella. The protagonist and his companions were already ready to leave. The two realized that the hero was like the wind. He came and then went away. The girl thinks it would have been better if he had rested a little longer and hopes to meet him again. While walking, Zeke asks if his subordinates hadn't forgotten anything. With a smile on his face, Hans replies that they hadn't. The hero realizes he had no plan in mind and didn't even know what his next destination would be. His thoughts were on the sword that symbolized Zeke Moore, the demon king of power. The demonic sword Thornium was an extremely powerful item. Looking at the landscape, the three of them stand still, thinking about what to do. Finally, the protagonist decides to visit the tourist city of Vialuin. The place was known for being very welcoming to visitors who were received with music and delicious food. In the middle of the city, a hooded person was carefully looking at the food, seeming to be hungry. Suddenly, a man pulls the hood from his head, revealing his face. Zeke realizes that it was the girl who fought with him in the forest. With a smile on his face, he notices that it had been a while since the last time they met. The girl's expression completely changes when she realizes who that man was. Standing in the same spot, they exchange intense glances. Vialuin is small but famous for its variety of tourist attractions. Upon arriving at the destination, Zeke informs that he and his subordinates would have a free day to do whatever they liked. Wasting no time, the boys decide to enjoy everything the city had to offer. Noticing that his stomach was growling, Zeke decides to get something to eat. Suddenly, he notices a strange figure before his eyes. When he removes the girl's hood, he immediately recognizes her. Even scared, the girl shows no signs of being a threat. Shortly after, he decides to buy something so they can enjoy it together. He hands a skewer to the girl, who looked very hungry. However, she wasn't used to that kind of hospitality. Zeke was so hungry that he ate with extreme speed. Annoyed, the woman asks if the protagonist remembers what happened between them. Shrugging, he tries to escape that situation. Suddenly, he asks if the two of them were in love with each other. The girl walks away upon hearing that kind of ridiculous joke. Finally, she wants to know what the young man wanted with her. Upon hearing that he was interested in a date, she questions him, noticing that those were not his real intentions. Moreover, the girl didn't seem comfortable sharing her own life with him. With curiosity, she asks what made him think she would accept that invitation. However, Zeke wasn't sure about anything. He just believed he understood a little about her thoughts. Once again, he tries to offer food to the girl. The only thing the boy was sure of was her desire to eat the skewer. Together, they sit near a fountain to enjoy the food. Zeke notices that the girl must have been starving since she was eating everything eagerly. If he were feeding her something more expensive, he would probably be broke. Trying to start a conversation, he asks the young woman's name. Meanwhile, he wonders if it was too soon to ask her name. Shortly after, the girl answers the question by saying her name is Leela. Both remain silent for a while, reflecting. Zeke looks curiously at the girl's face. That pretty girl had a name as beautiful as herself, Leela. Suddenly, colorful balloons float through the city. The two return to walking around looking for new meals. Zeke buys some drinks for him and Leela to enjoy together. Suddenly, the girl seems enchanted by something in front of her. In a store, there were beautiful and elaborate dresses. Shortly after, they enter the shop and she starts trying on some clothes. The girl looked more and more beautiful in those different outfits. From afar, Zeke watched everything cautiously. Later, they decided to enter a bar full of people. Zeke offered the girl the chance to change clothes to go on the date with him. However, she didn't believe it was reason enough to play dress up with a human. The protagonist blames the woman's own appearance, saying she looked beautiful in every outfit she wore. The waiter brings 2 beers for the customers. Zeke offers the drink to Leela, saying she would feel better. Trusting the man, she decided to give the beer a try. When the mug returns to the table, Zeke asks if the woman drank it. With a strange look, he claims to have put a potion inside the drink. But Leela says that a beer needed a little poison to add a refreshing touch. The two begin exchanging furtive glances. With curiosity, Zeke asks what that woman actually was. Despite his doubts, she answers the question, seeming interested in knowing what he was. Leela wanted to know if the one sitting in front of her was the real Zeke. She didn't remember changing her name, but remembers that he did. At that moment, he asks if the woman was talking about Moore. However, she mentions another name, in this case, Brave. If you were to choose a new surname, Leela believed that Brave was better than Moore. The protagonist starts reflecting on Zeke Brave. Suddenly, a commotion starts inside the establishment, looking like a fight. Zeke begins to recognize that voice. Shortly after, he notices the presence of his 2 subordinates in the place. Passing through the crowd, he starts to approach. The boys were standing in the middle of the bar, staring at some bullies. Snock says that they overheard a conversation and were provoked into a fight, and even when they ignored it, it was no use. The guy starts observing everything with a somewhat confused look. Shortly after, he notices the beautiful girl he had seen at the market. With a smile on his face, he approaches, offering Leela a date. Snock realizes that it was the woman from the forest and asks if they should restrain her. However, they decide to be less observant for now. The man starts touching the pretty girl's body and seems uncomfortable with his own advances. Annoyed by his approach, she begins to transform, ready to defeat that insolent man. Irritated, the white-haired girl prepares to attack the guy. Mocking, he asks why she decided to play hard to get now. Her red eyes light up with rage. In 2 jumps, the young man is on the ground after being electrocuted. Zich and Hans watch everything, thinking about how much of an idiot the guy is. Suddenly, a friend of the boy appears and, about to punch the young woman, asks who she thinks she's dealing with. Without showing much reaction, the girl just stares at him firmly, while activating her power again. But something catches her attention. We see that the protagonist has entered the fight and is holding the guy's hand, blocking his punch, taking the opportunity to strike him immediately afterward with his fist. The guy is thrown back with force, stopping in front of his friends, who become furious and charge at our boy, holding weapons in their hands. After a while of fighting, we see the 2 idiots lying on the ground, injured and apologizing for what they dared to do. Six then asks the white-haired girl how she electrocuted one of the guys earlier, and how much she cooked him. Without answering, the young woman asks why the protagonist didn't kill them. Intrigued, he asks how she dares to ask something like that. For someone who's being kind, the girl then asks if he shouldn't refrain from violence since he's a kind person. Our boy then states that that kind of people deserves to get beaten. Agreeing, the girl stops walking and looks at the moon without saying a word. Then she asks if Zich has finished the interrogation because she wants to leave. Showing that it's not over yet, the protagonist holds the girl's hand, telling her to wait a minute. His 2 friends watch everything with their mouths open. Our boy then says that he'll be busy the next day, but he would like to schedule a date with the young woman 10 days from now at the same place where they met, since simply saying goodbye like that without getting to know each other better is ridiculous. Even more because he noticed that she spent the whole day watching him. Smiling, the young woman says it's a deal, then quickly walks away. Watching the girl leave, Stitch thinks he got much closer than he expected and that he needs to find out who she is, since it's very suspicious that she's a powerful mage but has no money and is very ignorant, acting like she knows the world well while begging for food or changing clothes. The protagonist concludes that the young woman can only be from the future and has knowledge but no experience. Hans approaches and catches the boy's attention to ask if they have anything planned for the next day because he would like to visit the city's tourist spots. Answering, Sich says he'll go with him, stating that he knows an incredible place. The next day at the ancient ruins of Violewin, someone is enchanted by the structure. It's Hans and Snock, who wonder who built that place and for what. Holding a map, the protagonist tries to remember which way Thornium, his old sword, was, revealing that he doesn't know because in his past life, he destroyed the entire path while searching for it. Suddenly, the group reaches a place with a sign that says "Do not enter." The blonde boy then asks his master if it's right to enter there, but something catches the trio's attention, making them stop abruptly. Zich asks if anyone touched something, and Snock says that a noise came from up there. We discover that the passage that was previously open is now blocked by a wall of stones. The 2 younger boys then state that there must be something important beyond the wall, while the protagonist thinks that his old sword was in a hidden path, but he doesn't remember if there was a wall like that. He approaches and places his hand on the stones, leaving Hans a bit confused, because he noticed that the wall reacted to the boy's touch, unlike what happened when he and Snock touched it. Zich wonders why the wall reacted to his touch, and what is that aura coming out of the opening that is messing with his senses. Even without having any idea of what might be happening, the trio decides to enter. The protagonist realizes that the place, although familiar, is definitely not where Thornium is. Hans then asks him to look in the direction of his finger. Surprised, our boy realizes that on top of an altar is the sacred sword and Grenzenard, named Estelade, embedded in the ground. We see that the sword symbolizing the Demon King Zik Mor is Thornium. In contrast, the sword that symbolizes the Sun King Grenzenard is Estelade. Without moving, the protagonist observes the weapon that killed him in his past life, remembering that it is quite demanding regarding its owner, which means only someone deemed worthy can pull it out. Hans asks if the boy knows what the artifact is, and he replies that it is a sacred sword. With their mouths open, the two boys ask what that means. Excited, his servant asks if, in that case, he can become a hero if he takes the sword. His master says yes, leaving the young ones even more shocked. Snock then asks if he can be the first to try. Zich says yes, but thinks he won't be able to pull out the sword due to his bond with Nouwen. Even so, the boy decides he will try. Positioning himself, he starts pulling the handle of the weapon with all of his strength, while the two boys watch, but absolutely nothing happens. Snock decides to give up and step back. Consoling the boy, his mole strokes his face, making him realize that everything he needs is already right there. Hans asks if Zich will try to take the sword, but he says no, affirming in his mind that he knows it isn't meant for him. He then asks if his servant will try, and the boy says no because he is sure he wouldn't succeed either. Giving encouragement, our boy says that even so, it's worth trying. Suddenly, someone comes running through the corridors, making the trio stay alert. One of the boys says that whoever it is, they are coming from the other entrance. Thinking to himself, our boy says that those footsteps are definitely from someone well-trained, and wonders if it could be Gren coming for his sword, quickly discovering that they are actually feminine footsteps. More specifically, Leela, the girl he arranged to meet in 10 days. The young woman keeps running as she approaches the group. Zich then asks what she is doing there. Suddenly, we see that several hooded men are running after the girl, determined to capture her. Taking the lead, the protagonist asks Leela to duck, launching an attack right after on the group chasing her. A huge explosion occurs, making the young woman fall to the ground. Reaching out his hand to help her up, the protagonist asks if the group are her new friends. Standing, she says that actually they were trying to kidnap her. The boy then asks why, but Leela just looks down and stays silent. Smiling, our boy says she is definitely popular, then looks at the enemy group who quickly recovered. Pointing his sword, Zich asks if they are the same people who corrupted others before, since they are wearing the same clothes. Without answering, one of the men simply states that the plan has changed, ordering his minions to keep the girl and the boy alive and annihilate the rest immediately. The hooded men quickly charge with their swords, leaving Hans, who is attacked first, in a very bad position. Snock decides to protect the boy and activates his power, or rather Nouwen's power, making several stones fly toward the enemies. Instantly, the hooded men who are attacking his friend are thrown backward. While fighting, Zich thinks that his friends are doing well but will soon be at a disadvantage, then realizes that the place also isn't suitable for Leela's magic, as she keeps casting spells non-stop. Looking at the group's leader, our boy says that the man is as strong as a demon, even stronger than him without his demonic sword. Without hesitation, the man strikes him, then states that the boy is worse than he imagined. The trio who were fighting stop to look at Zich, who is thrown violently against a wall. A hooded man tells his captain that the sacred sword is very close to the boy, but the captain says it doesn't matter, since there's no chance someone like him would be chosen by the weapon. Turning his back, the man asks his subordinate to take care of the rest, and quickly eliminate the two boys, capturing the girl alive in the process, all while the rest of the group deals with the protagonist. Suddenly, the hooded leader feels a strange sensation. When he looks back, he sees that someone has grabbed the sacred sword, causing light to shine throughout the entire area, instantly knocking down his nearby men. With eyes wide open, Snock and Hans watch, and so does Leela, who stands with her mouth open as she sees that Zich has been chosen by the sword. Holding the weapon firmly, not even the boy can believe he managed to do it, remembering a few minutes ago when the leader of the group said he would never be capable. That irritated him so much that it made him draw strength from deep within to be able to grab Estelade, even though deep down he believed he would never be able to wield that sword. As she approaches, Leela asks why he removed the weapon from its place. Intrigued, Zich questions the reason for the inquiry, since it is obvious he only did it to save everyone. The girl then says she was asking how he managed to pick up the sword, replying the boy states that the weapon can only be lifted by someone deemed worthy, leaving the girl speechless, but only for a short time because she quickly questions whether he is worthy. Being honest, our boy says probably not, then places the sword back in its place. Surprised, Leela asks why the young man did that, and Zich states that he did it because the sword is not his. The young girl then asks if he knows what the weapon is capable of. Answering, he says yes, but that he will use a different one. With wide eyes, the girl asks if the boy is referring to Thornium. Passing by her, the protagonist says he already figured she knew, then approaches Hans and Snock to ask if they are okay. Both boys say yes, and he says that in that case, they can leave. Suddenly, Leela grabs his arm and starts pulling him back to where Estelade is, ordering him to pick the sword back up and use it instead of Thornium. Our boy refuses and says he only wants to use his own sword. Irritated, the girl says that to be a kind person, he needs Estelade and not Thornium. Not understanding the girl's concern, the boy says that the other sword, even if considered demonic, doesn't make anyone evil. Leela remains silent for a few minutes, but then orders him again to pick up the sword in front of him. Zich stares at her firmly, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, something starts hurting in his body, more specifically in his hand, on the same finger where he had the key that distorts destiny. Suddenly, Estelade seems to act on its own, creating a huge tornado of yellow light around the pair. Outside the storm, Snock and Hans scream for Zich, who asks if it is Leela doing that. Replying, the young girl says that it isn't magic, and that she thinks the sword is actually trying to teleport them to another realm. With no way out, our protagonist says it seems they have no choice, then shouts to get his two allies' attention, and tells them that if he doesn't come back after some time, the boys should leave and wait for him at the inn. Nervous, the blonde boy says that only he can open the door. Zich then asks them to follow the path from where Leela came, but the girl reveals that it is also blocked. To help the boys, the girl activates her power and throws her ring outside the tornado of light, telling Hans that he should be able to open the passage using it. Zich asks what the object is, but the girl says it's none of his business. The two then begin to slowly disappear. Worried, Hans asks his lord to be careful. Smiling, the protagonist tells the boy to only worry about himself. Then the pair vanishes, leaving only Estelade stuck in the ground. Snock asks his friend if our boy will be okay, and he says yes. The little boy then asks what they should do while waiting for him. Hans looks at the group of hooded figures on the ground and decides it is time to make some easy money. After searching everyone, we see that the boys manage to get many gold coins and potions. Meanwhile, the leader of the group remains unconscious with his mouth open but without his cloak, since his clothes are being used to wrap the money and potions. Snock asks if they shouldn't take one, and Hans questions whether it wouldn't be better to put everything in a chest, turning his attention back to the sacred sword as he wonders if he really couldn't pick it up. To clear his doubt, he decides it is time to try. His friend asks if the boy is really going to do that, and he says yes. Placing his hands on the sword's hilt, Hans prepares to pull with force, while Snock cheers him on from a distance. Suddenly, something catches the boys' attention. They turn and come face to face with another group of hooded figures running toward them. Hans asks Snock to get ready, but not to fight as we thought. Instead, to run. We see that several daggers are being thrown in the duo's direction. With the boys surrounded, one of the men asks if it was them who killed his captain, warning everyone not to do anything yet because he needs to ask a few questions. Nervous, the green-eyed boy asks his friend what to do now, and the same friend states that they only have one choice, which is to fight. Drawing his sword and charging into attack, Hans asks Snock to cover his back as he advances toward the enemies in front of him. Engaging in a sword fight, the blonde boy thinks that his opponent is very strong. Using no one's power, the other boy starts levitating rocks, then throws them at one of the men, hoping to incapacitate him. Successfully, he hits the hooded man's face, wondering if that was enough. Hans realizes that this is not the best place for Snock to use his powers, and that at this pace, they will end up dead. Suddenly, his opponent strikes him, making him lower his guard due to his mistake. The boy takes a kick right in the middle of his stomach, being thrown far away by the man's strength. Two hooded figures waste no time and prepare to attack again, while Snock becomes extremely worried. Being very agile, Hans blocks the strike with his sword. Mocking his enemy, says he knew it wasn't them who killed his captain. Pushing himself as much as he can, the blonde boy realizes he won't last much longer. Looking again at Estelade, which is right next to him. In his mind, the boy wonders what would happen if he managed to grab the sword and whether he would become like Zich. To execute his plan, Hans makes a different move and pushes his opponent back, then grabs the sword's hilt, determined to save Snock, who is also in trouble. Mocking the boy, the hooded figures tell him to accept that he is a loser. The other little boy is on the ground, cornered, while Hans thinks to himself that he also believed he wouldn't be able to pick up the sword. Then remembers a piece of advice he received the other day from Zich, who said that you should only give up when you're dead. But until that happens, you must do whatever it takes to save yourself, no matter the situation, even if hope is thinner than a thread. Using all his strength, the boy finally succeeds, and now Estelade is in his hands. Mouths wide open, hooded men ask how it is possible that the boy is considered worthy, while the light returns to Snock's eyes, who smiles from ear to ear. Hans starts to feel the sword's power entering his body. Trying to stop the impossible, the group of hooded men charge, saying they can't let the boy get used to it. The boy's friend warns him, and he prepares to fight and use all the power available to him. Elsewhere, Zich and Leela appear amidst the same tornado of light. Confused, the protagonist wonders where they are since the place looks similar to where he was before. The young girl beside him starts to activate her power, then reveals that she can't activate her teleportation ability. Trapped, the two decide to explore the place. Curious, our boy asks why Leela went there and why the hooded figures were following her. Looking at the ground, the girl doesn't answer. Impatient, the boy asks if she's really going to keep ignoring him even after he saved her life. Giving an answer, the girl says she isn't sure of the reason, revealing that she is not in possession of her old memories. Before she can say anything else, Zich feels pain in his hand again. Turning to him, Leela asks what is happening, and he says he's in pain. Confused, the girl says that he isn't injured and asks exactly where it hurts. The protagonist says it's his fingers that seem to be burning. Taking the boy's hand, the girl claims it might be an internal wound caused by some thorn. But suddenly, she sees something on the boy's middle finger, asking in disbelief if that is the key that distorts destiny. We return to the scene of Hans fighting against the hooded figures. Fearless, the boy continues holding the sacred sword and attacking without giving his enemies any time to breathe, who begin to run for their lives. Suddenly, an explosion happens, sending debris flying. Still on alert, the boy waits to see if he won. In shock, he feels like he could defeat anyone with that powerful sword. Looking ahead, the boy realizes that the enemies are getting back up and understands that it will be harder than he expected, deciding first to calm down before anything else. Because he has felt that emotion many times before, and losing focus during a battle is the worst thing that can happen. So he needs to concentrate and analyze the situation. Getting ready to attack, one of the enemies says this is a catastrophe and that he never expected to use that trick on a loser. Charging at Hans, we can see purple lights emanating from the man's body. Desperate, Snock begs his friend to be careful, as the blonde boy's eyes widen, since now he has to face a monster similar to the one Zich fought in the other city. Standing in front of him, the creature smiles with its huge fangs, making the boy break out in a cold sweat. Without hesitation, the man, now a monster, launches a brutal attack, but Hans raises the sacred sword and slams it into the ground with force, creating a flash so bright that the enemy has to shield his eyes to avoid going blind. While still trying to advance at all costs, an explosion of light happens, making the boy happy to realize that the beam of light has stabilized a bit. But to his misfortune, the monster remains standing without a single scratch. In his mind, Hans says that he already knew, that he couldn't fight like Zich, who managed to finish one of those with a single blow. Realizing right after that this monster actually seems much stronger, and that he could never have compared himself to someone as noble as Zich. Once again, the creature charges furiously, leaping when close enough to throw a devastating punch. Putting the sword in front of himself, Hans manages to defend, thinking that maybe, just maybe, he can win. Since now he seems to have enough skill to use the techniques the protagonist taught him. The monster keeps pushing non-stop, hoping to knock the boy down. Changing strategies, the boy jumps backward, making the creature lose balance. Irritated, it screams, calling him an arrogant bastard. Without hesitation, Hans decides it's time to finish things, successfully making the monster lose its head, literally, right in front of its companions, who start to panic. Looking at the other members of the group, the blonde boy starts running and striking them one by one, while remembering what Zich once said about always looking for the opponent's weakness, to figure it out as quickly as possible, and kill them as soon as the opportunity arises. Once the job is done, Hans is left panting, turning around just to check if he won't be attacked by surprise. Raising his sword, he happily shouts in victory, and so does Snock, who also celebrates. The little boy says that his friend truly was worthy of the sacred sword. Suddenly, one of the hooded figures starts getting up and asks if the boy really thinks he won, stating that both of them will die anyway, when the nightmare that will take over the city begins, taking with it everyone who lives there. We return to Zich and Leela, who asks if the boy's finger still hurts. Holding a small blue twig in his hand, he says he's fine because he drank a potion. Staring at the little plant, the girl makes a strange expression. Our boy then asks if she knows anything about it. Replying, the girl says something about it bothers her when she looks at that thing, but she's not sure if she knows anything. Zich realizes that the girl is not joking nor pretending to not remember anything. Suddenly, the small twig comes to life and points in a direction. The protagonist notices it and, even confused, tells Leela that they'll have to walk for a bit, and that he has many questions to ask her. Determined to learn more, the boy also says that any detail about her could be important. Agreeing with both things, the girl says she will answer what she can. Zich then says that for now, they need to start walking. The two head off in the direction the twig indicated. A short time later, Leela impatiently asks if he already knows what he wants to ask. The protagonist says yes. The girl then tells him to ask, but he can only ask 3 times. In disbelief, Zich says that's far too little, then asks what happens if she doesn't know the answer since she has memory problems. With a sad expression, the girl says the boy is right, but that he doesn't need to worry because she's confident she will be able to answer the 3 questions. Without waiting any longer, Zich asks what the girl's real name is. A bit surprised, she says she already told him her name is Leela. Our boy then says that he thought she made that up when he asked the first time, then asks if her name isn't Core since that's what the hooded men were calling her. Shaking her head, the girl says her name is what she said. With his hand on his chin, the protagonist wonders how he should interpret that answer, because he still thinks there's a reason for the hooded men to call her Core. Now his biggest question is whether the girl ever had another name one day. Deciding that in this case he will ask a harder question, Zich asks how Leela knew the things she revealed earlier. Answering straight away, the young girl says she has dreams. about the future of two people. Explaining, she says one is the hero of the sun who protects the world with the sacred sword, and the other is the demon king who wields the demonic sword, and that she dreamed of things they felt and experienced. Curious, the protagonist asks how the dreams end, and the girl says she always sees a different ending, where sometimes the demon king wins and other times the hero of the sword comes out on top. There are also moments when both die or when something completely different happens and the two never face each other. But in most scenarios, the confrontation happens. Zich then asks if she knows anything else about the future, but the girl denies it, stating that her memories are not intact. The boy asks why they aren't, and the girl starts walking away, saying she already answered 3 questions. Placing his hand on her shoulder, our boy says he still has 1 chance. Turning, Leela asks why he is so obsessed with knowing about her since she thought their situations were similar, since the boy is trying to become the Demon King after having access to information from the future. Widening his eyes, the protagonist thinks to himself that he didn't know she had been thinking that kind of thing this whole time, concluding that while he thought the girl had regressed, she thought that he saw the future in dreams, and that everything is connected to him and Gren. Remembering what Leela said, Zich wonders why, out of all possibilities, it happened to be the one where he died, not realizing that he's making a weird face while thinking. Snapping back, the boy says again that he still has a question to ask, and the girl asks if he already knows what he wants to ask. Approaching and getting really close, the protagonist asks what the girl's favorite color is in a light tone, as if that were the most important thing right now. The girl is surprised, showing that she was expecting something completely different. Shrugging, Zich asks if she doesn't remember either. Replying, the girl says her favorite color is white, but doesn't understand where he is going with that question. Passing by her, the protagonist states that this is why she called herself Leela, then says that he doesn't want to know anything else, because his curiosity has already been satisfied. Changing his mind, the boy asks if she really saw many possible futures. The girl says yes, but that she doesn't remember the details. Zich then asks if she thinks his current self will become the Demon King. Crossing her arms, Leela says she thinks not, surprising the boy, stating that even so, she's not sure because she doesn't know if he is walking a path she has already seen. But of all the futures she witnessed, in none of them was the boy able to pick up the sacred sword. Smiling, the protagonist asks if that means he is walking a path she doesn't know. Confirming, Leela says that's why he should carry the sacred sword and not get close to Thornium. Denying, our boy says he likes the demonic sword more, then asks her to stop walking, since something there seems different. Meanwhile, far away in the city, the leader of the hooded figures watches the people from the top of a mountain being interrupted by 2 subordinates, realizing immediately that his mission has failed. On their knees, the 2 men apologize and say that the search party hasn't returned and that they can't reach them. The leader then reflects for a few minutes, then says they must move on to plan B since plan F failed. Turning his attention to the townsfolk, he says they are all living happily, unaware of what is coming. What a pity, he adds, with a terrifying smile. We return to the inn, where Hans is sleeping, unlike Snock, who is staring at the ceiling. With a worried expression, he asks if his friend is asleep. With his eyes closed, the blonde boy asks why. The little boy then questions whether he really thinks Zich is okay. Confirming, Hans says his master has never lost a fight. Snock says that's true, but it's already been a day since he left. Turning to his friend, the blonde boy says that all they can do now is rest so they have the energy to fight. And since Zich knows how to take care of himself and has a mage by his side, he doesn't need to worry. Smiling, the little boy says that in that case, it's okay. Hans then reveals that he's actually more worried about what he heard during the fight, about the terrible nightmare that would fall upon the city. Snock says he thought the man was just trying to scare them, and the blonde boy says he hopes that's the case. Then asks what the little boy would do if the worst happened, since he can barely protect himself. Answering, the young boy says he would be scared, but even so, he would help whoever he could, since he promised to take on no one's burdens and can't simply run away just because he's at a disadvantage. Hans says that is indeed the right thing to do, while thinking that he also can't run now that he was chosen by the sacred sword. Suddenly, something catches the boy's attention. They run to the window to see what's happening. Outside, someone is screaming for help, and we see that the city is full of monsters and on fire, forcing the townsfolk to run back and forth cornered. The 2 boys then wonder if this was the nightmare the man was talking about. Meanwhile, in a mysterious place, Zich and Leela keep walking. The boy reveals in his thoughts that he is feeling something, deciding to grab his sword to protect himself from whatever it is. Suddenly, the pair see something on the ceiling. Leela quickly shouts to get Zich's attention. We see a strange creature covered in bubbles about to attack, and indeed the monster launches a tentacle, but the protagonist quickly cuts it in half, then charges at the creature, which explodes. He then asks what that was since he barely felt anything when he cut the monster. Looking ahead, Leela says that more creatures are coming. Without waiting, one of the monsters attacks, forcing Zich to dodge very quickly to avoid getting hit. The boy then asks if those are monsters made of slime, that unfortunately can dodge every attack because they have gelatinous bodies. About to be attacked, Leela casts a spell called Larwell Rod, but the creatures create holes in their own bodies and come out unharmed. Zich then says that the monsters are immortal and that this isn't fun. Then asks if the young girl knows anything about the enemies, but she says she can't think of anything. Tired, the protagonist says he doesn't even know where that path leads. Then asks the girl how long they've been there. Leela asks if the boy is worried about the kids, but he denies it, saying that he trained them well, and that both are quite talented. They just dream too big. Upon hearing this, the girl gets confused, but quickly realizes what he means. Zix simply confirms while attacking and says that the boys want to become heroes. Disagreeing, the girl says that's not an impossible dream since the boys are with him. Replying, the protagonist says he knows heroes better than anyone. Returning to the fight, Leela says that either way, if the boys have such ambitious dreams, they better hurry. We return to the city that is still in flames. A huge creature is chasing a small boy, who, amidst screams, falls hard to the ground, completely cornered since the monster is right behind him. Crying a lot, the child can only wait for the worst. But Hans steps in front of him and saves him, making us realize that there is nothing more dangerous than a sense of justice, because it's the only thing that surpasses someone's abilities. Still trapped with the slime monsters, Zitch says the place must be their base. Leela decides to attack again with a spell, creating a bright yellow light that radiates through the entire environment, and almost hits the protagonist in the process, who saves himself by jumping. We see that all the creatures have been defeated, leaving only smoke where their bodies once were. Zitch asks if the girl almost hit him on purpose, and she replies that she knew he wouldn't get hurt. The little twig in the boy's hand starts pointing in a specific direction again. He then says they're almost there, and the girl reveals that she's feeling some energy. Without waiting any longer, the pair heads to the end of the cave. Reaching their destination, the protagonist asks what that is in front of them, and we can see some kind of sword made of plant roots. Shocked, our boy wonders if that really is a sword. Out of nowhere, the little twig in his hand starts floating, heading toward the weapon, and connecting perfectly to one of the roots. The pair watches everything with their mouths open. A bright green light turns on. Zitch asks what's happening, but Leela says she doesn't know since she's never seen anything like this in her dreams. The process ends, and the sword shows that it's ready. The girl says it seems like the weapon is calling for the boy. Getting closer, Zitch thinks that he has finally discovered the origin of the Key of Destiny, then deciding to try to pull the sword from the ground. Still thinking, he says that the weapon is hot and that it feels like he's holding someone's hand. Without much effort, the protagonist manages to wield the sword, immediately feeling a strange connection with its energy, being shocked when its mana starts merging with his own, creating a powerful sensation, and then forming a glowing sphere in shades of green and blue that pulses in the air like a heart about to explode. Suddenly, his eyes widen as he feels the energy violently increase, and we see Leela shielding herself from an explosion that raises a dense cloud of dust and debris around her. Unharmed, the girl waits for the dust to settle, trying to understand what just happened with Zitch and the sword. Seeing the boy again, now holding a sword that shines only in blue, she breathes a sigh of relief. Also relieved, the boy says this is incredible, because he has never felt such a strong power flowing through his hands. We return to the chaos of the city, where fear and destruction still dominate every street and every corner. Hans keeps trying to hold the monster back even though he is exhausted, while asking the little boy to run away as fast as possible. Running, the child thanks him through tears, barely able to keep his eyes open from the desperation. We notice that the blonde boy is pushing himself extremely hard, sweating and panting with his muscles trembling from exhaustion, barely avoiding being crushed at the last second by a devastating blow from the creature. After killing the monster, he shouts to Snock, ordering him to evacuate the people to the outside of the gates. Two other guards are also fighting the giant creatures, but the battle is complicated with many more monsters appearing. Hans wonders what to do. Suddenly, Snock appears and says he has evacuated everyone. His friend then asks him to block the gates. Obeying, the boy activates no one's power, blocking the entrance with several stones. Furious, the monsters start punching the wall. Hans praises his friend for the job and says now they must deal with the monsters that are inside. Without hesitation, he starts attacking with the sacred sword, while Snock makes sharp boulders rise from the ground and the guards strike with their weapons. Sometime later, the green-eyed boy approaches and says that most of the monsters have already been defeated, making Hans smile in total relief. We find out that reinforcements arrived during the battle and wiped out the monsters on the outside. Growing tense again, the blonde boy wonders if this really was the hell one of the hooded men was referring to. Suddenly, an explosion happens with a deafening sound that makes the ground shake and everyone turn in alarm. Everyone turns to see what is happening, frightened by the intense light and the smoke spreading rapidly. We see feet approaching the group with firm, heavy steps, causing tension among those watching. Belonging to yet another horde of furious monsters marching violently toward the group. The guards shout and tell the boys to move back immediately, trying to protect them from the enemy's advance, getting hit directly by a sword that descends from the sky with force. Hans and Snock watch in horror, unable to understand how the situation escalated this quickly. A hooded figure holding the sword that killed the guards approaches with calm and threatening steps. The blonde boy notices that the person is wearing the same black cloak as the group they fought earlier in the ruins. Seeing Hans holding the sacred sword in his hands, the stranger immediately changes his expression to something more serious, and with a dark gaze asks who he is. Unafraid, the boy stands tall, wielding the sword that shines intensely. His mind racing, he wonders how the man knows about the weapon in his hands and what that could mean at this decisive moment. Then concluding that his opponent must be part of the men in black from the ruins, which means that Hans abruptly cuts off his own thought. To analyze how the battle is progressing, we see that one of the soldiers is being brutally annihilated with no chance of defense, while another is being caught by surprise from behind with no time to react to the treacherous enemy. Breaking into a cold sweat, the boy tries his hardest to concentrate despite the chaos unfolding around him. But his opponent remains standing right in front of him, surrounded by his huge and bizarre creations, completely ruining his analysis. One of the soldiers orders the others to finish off the cult leader and throw him out of the kingdom before more lives are lost. Obeying immediately, a group of men charges at him, determined to eliminate the threat once and for all, who watches them without removing the dark gaze from his face for even a minute, radiating an aura of terrifying superiority, while slightly grabbing his sword without anyone noticing what is about to happen. With just a single strike, the hooded figure takes down 3 soldiers who are trying to attack him, demonstrating his overwhelming strength. In shock, one of the men still breathing says that this is impossible, unable to believe what he just saw. But the enemy shows no reaction and continues his work, mercilessly wiping out everyone around him, just like the monstrous creatures that are 3 times the size of the soldiers and the boys. Terrified, one of the warriors thinks that this is his end and starts trembling in fear, not knowing what to do. But suddenly, Snock shouts for him to duck, with a firm voice that cuts through the panic in the air, making sharp boulders shoot from the ground and hit the monsters directly right after. Hans appears and asks the boy to leave the remaining creature to him, taking responsibility for the fight. Approaching the soldier, no one's ally hands the sword back to the man, who thanks him, stammering while his leader watches everything from a little farther away. Snock then asks the warriors to organize themselves, stating that each of them is important to the battle at that moment. After the warning, the blonde boy orders everyone to charge at his command, ready to fight to the end. We see that the leader of the knights is completely terrified by how the battle has turned, while 2 children give everything they have to save the kingdom that he should have been protecting with courage. Snock uses no one's power again to lift another enormous rock, demonstrating his supernatural strength. Feeling a little less shocked, the knight responsible for the others thinks to himself that maybe there's still hope, then shouts for his men not to be afraid because the heroes are with them and will not back down. The battle continues in full force without any pause, leaving the cult leader quite surprised, since he did not expect to encounter so much resistance and courage coming from young warriors. His precious creatures continue getting beaten and slaughtered, quickly losing strength, by Hans, who hasn't let go of the sacred sword for a single moment, staying firm and determined. The boy then feels someone approaching from behind and quickly turns, ready to react, successfully blocking the blow from the hooded figure, who is now focused on ending him. The man widens his eyes upon seeing that maybe the sacred sword is stronger than him, then asks why Esfele considered that mere boy worthy of wielding it. Sometime later, where the group of hooded figures was defeated earlier, the bright yellow tornado of light appears again, illuminating everything around intensely, bringing Zich and Leela back, who says that indeed they have returned to the place where they left. The young girl agrees, and the boy asks if the whole time she was just following her own intuition on this mission. Denying, the girl says that everything happened thanks to the special connection between his new sword and that place. Surprised, the protagonist questions how she knew all of this. Looking at the glowing weapon, Leela says that in this case, she followed her intuition, trusting what she felt. In his mind, our boy wonders what kind of sword that is, one that drew them there and brought them back when it was taken. Quickly realizing that something bad is happening in the city, the young girl beside him asks what he is talking about, and the boy states that the place has been invaded by dark forces, so they must hurry to assess the situation before it's too late to act. Looking at the bodies of the hooded figures, Zich wonders if the ones responsible were Snock and Hans, who may have faced the worst, when suddenly he realizes that something is wrong. Looking back, he notices that the sacred sword has mysteriously disappeared, and that the energy emanating there belongs to Hans. Looking at Leela, the boy says that they need to leave immediately to check something urgent, but seeing the girl's face, he gets scared and asks what's happening, sensing that something is wrong. Sweet and cold, the young girl says that it's all her fault, with an expression of guilt and despair, since she was the target of the mysterious group the entire time, and they definitely invaded the city just to find her and take her away as part of a bigger plan. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tab's channel.